Chapter 101. Soren was also trapped in autumn fall. The snow outside was too thick and the carriage could not move at all. Because of the cold weather, he customized a warm cotton-padded jacket for Vivian, which would take 3 days to complete. There were busy half-elves outside and he could vaguely see Droll's figure. The snow had collapsed some simple huts, and autumn fall was rescuing ordinary civilians. Because Gloria was taking care of the little girl, he went outside the city to take a look. The snow outside was indeed thicker, and when he stepped on it, it sank up to his calf. Outside the city was a piece of farmland, but it was now a vast expanse of white. He could see men and women busy in the fields, digging through the snow to transport back the crops and vegetables that were about to be harvested. If they were not transported back as soon as possible, it would not take long for them to rot, and they would lose their source of food. It seemed that winter wheat could not be planted. The thickness of the snow was too high. In the past, winter wheat was only planted in October. Many half-elven farmers looked worried. Their talent was not very good. They were just a little more flexible than humans, but they were still just ordinary people. A peasant woman was carrying lettuce. Cabbage and lettuce were common vegetables in the south. Her fingers were cold and pale. Next to her, a girl with a cold nose was helping. Because her clothes were relatively thin, she hugged her hands from time to time and blew air into her palms. Farther away, a little boy of 10 years old was digging a snow pile. Soon he excitedly dug out a frozen bird from the snow pile, raised it high and shouted, "Sister, look! We have meat to eat tonight." The snow broke some tree trunks and some birds' nests were directly hit. The branches were covered with ice, which looked like hanging crystals. This was the life of ordinary people. Some hunters entered the forest in groups. They were experienced enough to foresee the severe test of winter, and began to hunt some prey in advance. Maybe they were lucky enough to find some frozen animals. Farther away, some people were busy repairing houses. The poor ordinary people built thatched houses. The roof was not very strong and it was easy to be damaged in the days of heavy snow. There were calls of birds in the sky. They had to seize the last opportunity to migrate, or they would all freeze to death here. The cold winter more than a month in advance changed a lot. It forced animals to enter hibernation in advance, and it also disrupted people's farming plans. Crackling sounds could be heard. Soren stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and opened his palm. Hailstones the size of rice grains fell down. The noise became more and more intense. The farmer woman in the distance shouted, and the 2 children ran to her side. The little boy even fell on the snow. The falling hail was getting heavier and heavier. The farmer woman didn't even care about the vegetables she had dug out. She used her body to protect the 2 children and ran towards the house in the distance. Traces of pain could be felt. Soren raised his head and looked at the sky. The hailstones were getting bigger and bigger, from the size of soybeans to the size of pebbles. Someone cried out in pain in front of him. He dashed out and caught the 2 children in his arms. He said in a low voice, "Hurry up and find a place to hide." The farmer woman didn't have time to thank him. She staggered and followed him. Her forehead was hit by a pebble-sized hailstone. There were bruises on her head. The village was full of curses. Soren put the 2 children down. He frowned and looked at the hailstones outside. It sounded like someone was knocking on the roof. Some people's faces were bruised, and there was even a trace of blood on their forehead. The hailstones didn't last long. From the size of rice grains to the size of pebbles, it only took about 10 minutes. People walked out in fear. They looked up at the light in the sky, and then returned to the fields to harvest the crops. Soren left a bag of jerky for the 2 young children, and then followed the road into the forest. The familiar road was no longer in sight. The snow covered everything and many weeds were covered under the snow. He saw Druid's figure, leaping through the forest with incomparable vigor. Although these droll were annoying, they weren't bad. Many droll had been working hard in the desert, trying to transform the desert left behind by the Arcane Empire into an oasis. This process had been going on for thousands of years. However, the efforts of several generations had only completed less than 1%. The thousands of kilometers of desert was still filled with yellow sand, and the ancient cities that had sunk under the quicksand were still emitting energy radiation. Only some plants with particularly strong vitality could still grow. It was easy to destroy the environment, but it would take countless years to repair it. Soren's attitude towards the droll was very complicated. Sometimes he wanted to kill them, but sometimes he felt that they were great. Especially when he saw the oasis built by the droll in the desert. The green color that represented the traces of life under the yellow sand was really shocking. They were very important in the eyes of the desert people. Soren saw more than once the desert people kneeling on the ground and kissing the ground where the tree shepherds walked. The snow had begun to eliminate the first batch of old, weak, sick and disabled people. Only the strongest creatures could survive the harsh winter. Soren frowned more and more as he walked forward. The road to the Elven Kingdom was completely covered in snow. Carriages were basically useless and they had to walk all the way to get through. It was impossible to wait until the snow melted. They would have to wait until at least next year in such cold weather. Soren couldn't afford to waste so much time, so they had to hurry through the snow. Vivian's small body couldn't walk in the snow. She didn't have enough strength and Soren's heart ached. It was the only way. He had to carry Vivian on his back. The snow path was more than 100 kilometers long, and it would take them a long time. He just didn't know if Gloria could handle it, but she should be fine as a high-grade witch. There were many spells that could be used. By the time Soren returned, it was already afternoon. Aladdin was standing at the bar, bragging. There were a lot of guests around him, and from time to time, people would laugh and ask him to have a drink. When he saw Soren, the halfling's face was already flushed. This guy must have been a storyteller before. It was a pity that he didn't work as a bard. Otherwise he would have earned a lot of tips along the way. Many halflings liked to brag and they wouldn't get angry after being exposed. At most they would argue back. Their storytelling skills were very good, and they had interesting pastimes in their free time. Even the owner of the inn was listening with great interest. Aladdin was not completely bragging. He had more experience than many people. At the very least, he was able to accurately describe the height, characteristics, and habits of the hill giant. He even knew its habitual attacks. Of course, the main purpose was to prove how nimble he was and how he could escape from the hill giant's attacks. After that, he was able to make the hill giant run in circles. As for killing the mountain giant, there was no need to think about it. It was really difficult to kill them with those two small daggers. Under the tavern's guest cheers, the small Aladdin danced on the long table. It was a very cheerful clapping tap dance. It was said that if he danced well, he could hook up with cute baby-faced halfling girls. The people around couldn't help but clap their hands and follow the rhythm. The already lively atmosphere suddenly became a lot more lively, and the owner of the inn even wanted to hire him. 3 days passed quickly. During this time, Soren was trying his best to memorize spells. Gloria seemed to know that he was learning spells, and she intentionally or unintentionally gave him some pointers. However, this mysterious northern witch obviously didn't know that Soren was already a rank 5 wizard. Soren didn't want to surprise her too much and cause unnecessary trouble. After all, a rank 5 wizard appeared in just half a month, which was even more frightening than Vivian's amazing talent. It was better to wait until the opportunity came. Soren successfully memorized a level 2 spell, Brute Force. This spell could temporarily increase his strength by 4 points. Together with the ogre bracers, it could increase his strength to 18 points, which could make up for his lack of attributes. Unfortunately, it could only last for about 10 minutes. However, a battle would last about 10 minutes. With the buff spell, he would have no problem facing the ogre head-on. Low-grade wizards had very few spell slots, so he could only calculate how to use them. He used invisibility to save his life and brute force to fight. The number of spell slots for wizards above grade 3 began to increase substantially. On the day of their departure, the little halfling actually followed them. He had a good time in the inn. Every day someone would treat him to a drink. Soren thought that he would stay in autumn-fall. "I'm a gourmet." Aladdin frowned as he moved forward in the snow. He then said, "How can a gourmet stay in one place? I've tasted all the delicious food here, so naturally I have to go to the elves' place." Gloria seemed to be a little unaccustomed to it. Noble witches rarely traveled by themselves, let alone in a snowy environment. Soren wanted to help, but he couldn't. He was carrying a half-cloth bag on his back like a backpack. Inside it was little Vivian. The little girl wrapped her arms around Soren's neck with her little white hands and leaned her little head on Soren's shoulder. Her soft breathing was a little itchy, and from time to time she would kick her little feet and spread her palms to catch the falling snowflakes. At first she was very energetic, but later on she became a little lazy because there was a vast expanse of white snow everywhere. After walking for a while, the northern witch was finally a little tired. She bit her lip, stubbornly looked at the others, and then gave herself a buff. After all, spellcasters were more delicate. Gloria, who had been blessed with lightness technique, immediately walked with light steps, leaving only shallow traces on the snow. It seemed that lightness technique was even better than lightness technique. The flying spell didn't last very long, so it wasn't suitable for long-distance travel. The cold wind in the sky was also troublesome. It must be combined with a protective spell, Otherwise, the witch's body wouldn't be able to withstand it. The whistling cold wind blew. Leaving a row of footprints on the snow, the group gradually entered the forest. The wind and snow quickly erased the traces they left behind. Chapter 102. Soren didn't walk very fast. It took them an entire day to travel 30 to 40 kilometers, especially after entering the forest. Their speed was greatly reduced and it would probably take them 2 or 3 days to reach the Elven Kingdom. Vivian hid her little head behind Soren's back, but her face was still red from the cold wind. Aladdin didn't have the energy to talk, so he just silently followed behind them. The only ones who had it easy were Soren and Gloria. The former had 20 points of constitution, while the latter had the buff from her spells. Evening. They camped in a leeward valley. The little Vivian came down and stretched her arms and legs, then helped Soren set up the tent. However, she was small and weak, so she was basically just a bystander. The halfling sat down on a rock and took a while to catch his breath before starting to get busy. They used some dry firewood to make a fire. Some level 0 spells were very useful at this time, and soon there was a trace of warmth around them. Soren sat next to the fire and barbecued meat, while Gloria sat quietly and rested. The halfling seemed to have recovered some of his strength, but he was still a little quiet. He held a pan and fried mushrooms. Vivian stood behind Soren and massaged his shoulders. The little girl was very obedient, but unfortunately she didn't have enough strength to feel anything. When she saw the tired Gloria, she immediately went over and massaged her. The halfling was very happy and thought that Vivian would also come over to give him a massage, but unfortunately he was ignored by Vivian. The temperature dropped very quickly. It was now close to 0 degrees. Soren stretched his body and took off his clothes. The two people next to him were shocked, especially Gloria. She looked at him as if he was an idiot. Soren just smiled and waved at Vivian, indicating that he was fine. Then he walked into the snow and covered his body with ice and snow. In the end, other than his head, his entire body was covered in ice and snow. Gloria and the halfling's mouths turned into the shape of the letter O. They almost wanted to say, "Are you crazy? This way I can train my resistance to the cold." Soren's face was slightly pale, mainly because of the cold. 20 points of extraordinary constitution. He could already take the initiative to train some low-level resistance talents. In the future, when he went to higher-level places, especially some areas in the abyss, the degree of coldness there would be much higher than here. Right now he was just training in advance. Extraordinary constitutions had adaptability, and under special circumstances, it was highly possible for them to grasp the corresponding additional specialties. Half an hour passed quickly. When Soren's lips turned slightly blue, a row of data appeared. Successful training. You have received 12 points of frostbite. You have developed a slight resistance to the cold environment. You have obtained information about minor cold resistance. Ho ho ho. Soren pulled away the ice and snow and ran to the fire to warm up. At the same time, he took out a bottle of healing potion and whispered, "You don't have to worry about me. I'm not crazy yet. This is just a special training method. I just met the training conditions. There are also some professions who will train in extreme environments. I just happened to meet this condition. 12 points of frostbite. An ordinary person would almost freeze to death. After all, being buried in ice and snow for half an hour was not a joke. Do you want me to give you a resistance enhancement?" Gloria looked at Soren with a strange expression. She really didn't agree with his self-abuse behavior, but she had heard of some professions who trained in extreme environments. Most of them were professions like monks. She had never heard of rogues who needed to face extreme environments naked. Soren shook his head and slowly said, "No need. That way it won't have the effect of training." After a while, Soren drank a bowl of hot soup to maintain the heat, then took off his underwear and covered his whole body in ice and snow again. The halfling's mouth couldn't help but twitch and murmured, "What a madman." Until night fell. Soren had covered his whole body 4 times in a row. The accumulated frostbite had made his face pale and looked quite weak. Vivian distressed him and told him not to do this, but he waved his hand and said, "It's okay. I can still bear it. It won't delay tomorrow's journey." What a madman. Gloria had a complicated expression, but Soren's self-abuse still made her feel a little shocked. This guy was really stubborn and crazy. Soren covered his whole body under ice and snow again. When the accumulated frostbite was close to 60 points, the prompt finally changed. Training successful. You have received 6 points of frostbite. You have developed a little resistance to cold environments. You have successfully mastered minor cold resistance. Success. As the data appeared, Soren suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his body, and his whole body seemed to have adapted to the cold. Even if his whole body was covered in ice and snow, he didn't feel as cold as before. Minor cold resistance, personal ability. In the process of resisting the cold, you gradually adapted to this environment. You will adapt to most cold climates, and your resistance to special cold environments has also increased. From now on, you are immune to any cold damage below 1 point. When you are attacked by spells or spell-like spells, any cold damage will be reduced by 1 point. Prerequisite: Constitution of at least 16 points. Soren's face quickly regained its color. He used a spell to dry his whole body and then put on his clothes. This change could be said to have happened in a short time, and the two people next to him were stunned. At first, Soren's whole body was stiff and pale, but now it was as if nothing had happened. The halfling's fingers trembled and murmured, "This works?" Aladdin's face showed an eager expression, but in the end he gave up. He was afraid that he would freeze to death. In the past, Soren swam in the ice river, and it took him a few days to master minor cold resistance. Now that he had extraordinary constitution and the ability to regenerate, he could challenge more difficult training methods. This ability was harder to improve as he progressed. If he wanted to strengthen it to minor cold resistance, he would need to enter some special geographical environment. Conservatively speaking, minor cold resistance would accumulate more than a few hundred points of frostbite. Without the help of a priest, it would be difficult to succeed in a short time. Immunity to 1 point of cold damage, this effect didn't seem like much, but it could save his life in a critical moment. When it was upgraded to a higher level, it was also very effective against all kinds of spells. Many northern warriors had a weak resistance to the cold due to their natural living environment, which was why Gloria was more resistant to the cold. The most difficult thing to train was fire resistance because it couldn't be trained directly by a fire. Only slow damage could produce the training effect, and it could also allow the body to gradually adapt and develop the corresponding resistance. Soren once trained his fire resistance in a volcanic environment for a long time, and he finally advanced after falling into the lava. The easiest thing to train was poison resistance, but the process was more painful and took more time. Soren didn't have time to train yet. The next day, Soren was obviously much more relaxed, and the bone-chilling wind's influence on him had completely disappeared. The halfling also tried to resist the cold, but he didn't dare to be as crazy as Soren. He just wore his clothes in the snow, and when he came out, his lips were trembling. But there was still some effect. At least his body gradually adapted to the cold climate, and it wasn't as difficult as it was at the beginning. If he wanted to learn the ability, minor cold resistance, it would take at least a long time, but the short-term training effect had already allowed him to adapt to the colder weather like the northerners. The group trekked for 3 days. Soren carried Vivian for more than 100 kilometers. When the surrounding trees began to become clear, and the traces of the road became more and more obvious, they knew that they were about to reach the elves' territory. This was a place blessed by the gods, just like the snow in autumn fall was thinner than outside. There would always be a trace of power in places where the gods were concerned. Otherwise, the gods who controlled other areas could casually send disasters, such as the goddess of pestilence and the goddess of disease. When they spread plagues and diseases, the fear of mortals could also strengthen their power. There was no shortage of believers in this world who prayed out of fear. The snow on the road was getting less and less, and there were more and more animals moving around. Soren saw some marks carved on the trees, which were left by the elves' patrol team. The elves were more repulsive to other creatures, but they were not obviously hostile. It was not easy to enter their territory, but it was also not very difficult. In the afternoon of the same day they saw the elven village. In fact, it was not as beautiful as they imagined. It was just a relatively delicate treehouse. They also knew how to cut wood to build houses. The glory of the high elves had passed. They were destroyed along with the arcane empire, and the remaining elves were just a little more elegant than other creatures. The elves' appearance was more beautiful and handsome, but not to the extent of being astonishingly beautiful. It was just that the overall level of the elves was a little higher than the humans. Vivian looked around curiously. The elven guards in the village warned them not to cause trouble and then let them in. The elven villages in the outside world were more closely connected to other creatures. The deeper they went into the forest, the stricter the inspection was, especially near the elven capital. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter. There were still humans and half-elves living here, but their numbers were relatively small. The elves also knew how to farm, and they could not feed so many people by relying on the supply of nature. The village was surrounded by a clear river, and there were also open farmlands nearby. Ordinary elves were not that elegant and noble. They were not born professionals. Their strength also needed to be improved through training. The most eye-catching thing was a big tree. Every elven village had such a big tree. It was the legendary ancient tree guard, challenge rating 12. However, it was still in a deep sleep. P.S. It's too cold to ride at night in winter. I've only just finished my morning update, so I didn't wake up as early as before. Today's update will be released before 5 a.m. Chapter 103. Soren first settled down Vivian. The little girl looked around curiously. She was curious about everything in front of her. Aladdin was also a restless person. When he saw a fruit that he had never seen before, he would secretly take two. Most rogues were not very honest. The elves were the race that planted the most fruits. Basically, they had fruits all year round. Here, the fruits would be sliced and brought to the main table. Nearly a third of the elves were vegetarians. Occasionally, they would put some meat on the table. The other elves usually ate the same diet as humans. Gloria seemed to be in a good mood. She held a red fruit and played with it, but she didn't seem to want to take a bite. Soren first walked around the village and then looked at the big tree from afar. The ancient tree guardian didn't allow others to get close to it. There was a circle of fences around it, and it would arouse the hostility of the elves. This was a supernatural creature with a challenge rating of 12. It gave more than 10,000 slaughter EXP, but it was quite difficult to kill. The ancient tree guardian was born with a bonus of 12 HP, and its basic HP was increased by 1 HP every year. This ancient tree guardian in front of him had at least 400 to 500 HP. Basically, it wouldn't be killed by fire, and it might even turn into a burning angry ancient tree. That was just too awesome. They were a life form similar to the air and fire elementals. This kind of life form was easy to mutate, advanced mutation. The elves sold high-quality bows, exquisite jewelry and handicrafts to the outside world. These things were very popular with the nobles. They needed to import food, iron products, cloth and so on. The way of living in isolation and self-sufficiency had long disappeared hundreds of years ago. Only some elves who adhered to traditional teachings would live in the depths of the forest. This place was not far from Soren's goal. The team was a little tired after 3 days of trekking. Today was definitely a day to rest. Tomorrow he was going to talk to Gloria about his plan. The night passed quickly. The next day, everyone gathered in Soren's room. When they heard Soren's words, their eyes were obviously brighter. Wait. Aladdin clapped his hands excitedly and said in a low voice, "Are you saying that there is a hidden treasure somewhere nearby? But there are monsters guarding the area, so you need our help?" "No problem. Aladdin loves treasures the most. After we find them, I want a share of the spoils." Gloria also seemed to be very interested in the treasure hunt. She gently lifted the ends of her hair. Because she had been wearing a veil, her expression could not be seen. However, from her demeanor, it could be seen that she was quite interested in this matter. There were many treasures in this world, but the ones that were truly valuable were scattered and hidden. Even the high-grade witches would have a strong desire for those treasures. However, when she heard Soren's location, she frowned and asked, "Over there? Legend has it that there is a dragon nearby." Aladdin's expression froze for a moment. Then there was no worry on his face. Instead, he said excitedly, "Is it a dragon's den? Wouldn't that make his wealth even more shocking? Just like in the legends, are we going to steal the dragon's treasure?" Gloria frowned and said softly, "With our strength, going to the dragon's den is just suicide. There must be an adult dragon there." Soren gently shook his head and explained, "Of course it's not a dragon's den. That place is too dangerous. The location of the treasure is dozens of kilometers away from the dragon's den. That dragon is still sleeping and is not a threat to us. Moreover, it is a metal dragon, not a relatively evil chromatic dragon. My target is near a canyon. There are active earth elementals there. In the canyon there is an elemental altar. Below it is the treasure we are looking for. There should be a lot of valuable things inside." There was a metal dragon on the elves' side. It seemed to be an adult copper dragon. However, it would still sleep for 1 or 2 years. It would only wake up during the time of troubles. The Seal of the Four Elements was a legendary level quest. The reward was naturally not only legendary level equipment, but also extremely valuable gems and tools. The earth elementals would condense a kind of core. It was an important tool for making clay golems and stone golems. After digging it out, it could be easily sold at a high price of more than 500 kindler. Simply put, even if they deducted the very special legendary level equipment, the profit of this adventure would be more than 15,000 kindler. Divided among the 3 of them, there would be 5 or 6,000 kindler. It was more than 10 times more than an ordinary adventure. Very good. The halfling clapped his hands. He was quite enthusiastic about making money. He asked, "When do we leave?" "If we leave in the next 2 days, I'll need to prepare some gadgets. According to the old rules, we are now an adventurer team. Since you are the one who provided the location of the treasure, you should be responsible for leading the team. In the end, you get 10% more of the profits." No problem, right? During this period of contact, they had learned a lot about each other. However, the halfling was still very concerned about the distribution of the spoils. There was a universal old rule among adventurers. The person who provided the location of the treasure could get 10% more, and the other members had to get at least 10%. The amount of distribution was determined by their contribution in battle, but in most cases, it was balanced after making up for the consumption. Adventurers sometimes formed temporary teams. After all, there were very few fixed teams. There would always be people who retired and left. Sometimes, the difficulty of the mission would lead to too few people to complete it. Soren would occasionally find some temporary teammates. He used to deal with people from the evil faction. Although these people were quite bad, there were many who were trustworthy. Only a few would stab someone in the back. The halfling in front of him was undoubtedly more reliable than them. He came into contact with the drows the most. These guys were sinister, cunning, vicious, and cruel. However, Soren had fought side by side with them hundreds of times. It was common for them to be selfish, but there were not many cases of betrayal. There was even a time when he thought that the drows were easier to deal with than humans. As long as you understood their rules, you could even win their respect. Of course, it would be best if you showed enough evil and insidious. If you looked kind and easy to bully, they would be happy to plot on how to quietly kill you. The group was discussing when to leave. But at this time Vivian's small figure stood up and said with a firm look, "Brother, I want to go too." Astonishment. Soren was obviously stunned for a moment, then he denied, "This mission is very dangerous." "What are you going to do?" "I'll put you in a very safe place." The little girl did not speak. She just looked at him with a firm look. He felt inexplicably guilty, as if he had done something wrong. "Hey." Aladdin covered his forehead and muttered, "You're only 8 years old. You want to go on an adventure?" "This is too." Vivian glared at him and retorted, "Aren't you just a little taller than me? If you can go on an adventure, why can't I? Besides, I'm much stronger than before." The halfling was speechless for a moment. He compared the height of the two and found that they were indeed a little taller. Gloria was obviously stunned for a moment, then she frowned and fell into deep thought. She slowly said, "Maybe Vivian can go with us. After all, she has to choose her own path. We can guide her, but she has to walk the path herself. She will have to face too many things in the future. It's good for her to sharpen herself now. Besides, I can protect her." Gloria's words were obviously biased towards Vivian, which immediately attracted the little girl's grateful eyes. Soren frowned and glared at the northern witch, then continued with a pale face, "No. It's too dangerous. You have problems moving around in the forest by yourself. What can you do if I take you with me?" The little girl's eyes were obviously watery. She stubbornly turned her head and did not look at him. "That's right." Gloria suddenly said, "I forgot to tell you. Vivian is now a level 3 warlock and a level 2 wizard." "What?" Both of them showed a shocked expression. Soren's expression was a little better. After all, he knew about Vivian's amazing talent. However, the halfling's expression was quite exaggerated. He pointed at the little girl in front of him, showing a look of disbelief, and murmured, "She's a warlock? Or a wizard? Then wouldn't she have a lot of spell slots in the future?" In fact, he did not say this sentence because the little girl in front of him had subverted his previous worldview. The spell slots of wizards and warlocks were calculated separately. Wizards relied on their memory to obtain spell slots, while warlocks relied on their talent to obtain spell slots. Warlocks who were also wizards were quite rare. This was because the requirements for talent were extremely high. However, those who succeeded often had more spell slots than others, and could also help the warlock master the number of spells. To put it simply, after the collapse of the magic net, all spellcasting professions would be converted into mana. Wizards' mana was converted according to their intelligence and profession level, priests' mana was converted according to their wisdom and profession level, and warlocks' mana was converted according to their charm and profession level. Therefore, warlocks' and wizards' mana was converted directly from intelligence, charm, and profession level. It was much higher than wizards of the same level. However, because the two professions' levels were reduced, it would be more difficult to master high-level spells. For example, Vivian now had 2 level 1 spells and 1 level 2 spell slot from her warlock level. At the same time, she also had 2 level 1 spell slots from her wizard level. PS1, the last few paragraphs took a long time to find information, which caused the writing to be much slower. The third update will be at night. PS2, the magic net can be understood as a website. If wizards want to access it, they have to manually connect to the network and enter the URL. Warlocks, on the other hand, have automatic dialing. The front page of the browser is the magic net, and a few bookmarks will automatically appear with every upgrade. However, no matter who wants to access the page of legendary spells, they will be shown a 404 error. Magic Net Seal. Chapter 104. This. Soren looked very hesitant. From his point of view, it was necessary for Vivian to familiarize herself with combat. Since the upcoming chaotic period was unprecedented, it was necessary for her to learn how to protect herself. However, from a personal point of view, Soren didn't want her to take risks. He also thought that it was too early for her to do so. After all, she was only 8 years old this year. Letting an 8-year-old girl go into combat? Gloria seemed to understand Soren's hesitation. She looked at the others and said softly, "Vivian, let them see your spells." The little girl nodded and looked around. She then whispered, "Do I cast it here?" Gloria raised her hand and set up a spell barrier. She then pointed at the wall and said, "Cast it there." Vivian nodded. Then, under the shocked gazes of the others, she pointed at the wall and an arcane missile appeared at her fingertips. Without any incantations or gestures, the arcane missile instantly hit the wall and left a 3-centimeter deep dent. However, this was just the beginning. A series of BIU spells appeared. 8 arcane missiles appeared in a row. The first 4 directly hit the wall, and the last 4 hit the empty space outside the wall, leaving a dent more than 10 centimeters deep. Instant cast. Soren's expression was very interesting. He couldn't believe it. Vivian didn't chant any incantations, but she cast 4 spells in a row. The power of 8 arcane missiles was equivalent to the higher-level lesser missile storm. Soren silently calculated his own abilities. He was surprised to find that he didn't even have a chance to attack Vivian. He would be severely injured by her 4 instant-cast arcane missiles in a second. How is this possible? How did my sister suddenly become so strong that I can't even defeat her? Soren's expression was a little sluggish. The halfling's mouth was so wide open that an apple could fit in it. Gloria smiled proudly and said slowly, "Because there wasn't enough time, Vivian only learned 1 or 2 simple spells. However, with her talent, it's still very easy for her to deal with some ordinary enemies. When casting arcane missiles, even I can't compare to her. I have to say she's a genius." Missile storm killing style. It was a very popular fighting style among the wizards because it only required the prerequisite ability, spell casting. Arcane missile was the fastest spell to cast. No other spell could be faster than it because it only took 1 second to cast it. This fighting style required a long time to practice the ability, spell casting. Basically, there were no other requirements. It was also commonly known as the brainless BIU fighting style. A level 9 adept could have 4 level 1 spell slots, and each arcane missile could generate 5 energy bullets. In other words, 20 energy bullets could be fired in 1 second, which was equivalent to the maximum effect of a level 4 spell, lesser missile storm. If used together with the metamagic ability, empower spell, all the level 2 spell slots could be stored into level 1 arcane missile. At the same time, with the metamagic ability, maximize spell, all the level 3 spell slots could be stored into level 1 arcane missile. There was also the ability, instant cast. The level 4 spell slots could also be used to store arcane missile. These 3 metamagic abilities were used to strengthen the power of spells. However, it required an additional increase in spellcasting ability and level. To strengthen the effect of a level 1 spell, a level 2 spell slot was needed. To expand the effect to the limit, a level 3 spell slot was needed. To make the spell instant cast, a level 4 spell slot was needed. The legendary brainless missile storm style was such an extreme way of fighting. Wizards who used this fighting style were extremely violent and also extremely fragile. Their explosive lethality could frighten people to death, but their ability to fight for a long time was quite poor. They were once jokingly called men who only fight for 1 second. For a long time, wizards who used this fighting style would win in 1 second. They would either use the missile storm to completely kill the enemy, or they would be killed by the enemy and lose their spellcasting ability. It was very strong but also very fragile. It was suitable for dealing with a single person. When faced with two people, it would be over in an instant. The lethality of arcane missile was relatively limited. It could be reduced by constitution. If the spell power was not high, one arcane missile would at most deal 5 damage. 20 arcane missiles would deal 100 damage. Warriors above level 10 basically had hundreds of HP. With armor and shield blocking, they could at least resist 5 to 10 arcane missiles. Therefore, if one wanted to use the missile storm to kill a high-grade warrior, they had to completely memorize the arcane missile spell slots. It was hard to say with this fighting style, because there were spells that could neutralize the energy of the arcane missile, such as shield. There were also many equipment that could reduce the damage of the arcane missile by more than 50%. There were also some skills that could avoid the damage, such as the Thief's Shadow Jump. As long as they avoided the attack for a second, they would not be damaged at all. Soren could not evaluate the effectiveness of this fighting style, but it was excellent for a surprise attack. Of course, after the attack there would be no fighting power. Oh. Vivian withdrew her white little finger, looked at Soren timidly and whispered, "I've used up all my spells. There's only one level 2 spell left." That's right. It was just a matter of 1 second. Vivian used up all her level 1 spells, and then she punched a hole in the wall and left a 10-centimeter deep hole in the ground. Her powerful innate attribute gave her an extremely high spell power. If combined with the spellcasting genius ability, the power of her arcane missile was close to that of a grade 3 wizard, but there were not as many of them. In the future, when her profession level increased, the number of arcane missiles she could cast would also increase to 5, which was the maximum number of spells she could cast. Oh my god. The halfling reached out and touched the hole in the wall, then looked at the hole outside and murmured, "I can't even last a second against a little girl. Should I go back to farming?" It seemed that Soren was not the only one who was shocked. The halfling next to him was also shocked. Dodging the arcane missile was as difficult as dodging a bullet. It was very difficult for non-legendary level professions to do it. Although she used up most of her spell slots in one go, this kind of lethality was something that even Soren and the halfling next to him could not withstand. In just half a month, Vivian actually had the ability to seriously injure or even kill them in an instant. Soren was silent. He also did not know how to evaluate Vivian's combat power. He could say that she was strong. Her explosive power was indeed amazing, but it was a one-hit battle style. After casting the spell, it was useless. He could say that she was not strong. If she used it at the right time, she could directly injure or even kill an enemy. At a critical moment, she could even save the world. In the past, wizards who used this kind of fighting style were both loved and hated. Many people were hesitant to cooperate with them. When she used her explosive power, it was scary. After the fight, you had to protect her to memorize the spell. Restoration. Gloria gently waved her hand and repaired the damaged wall. Then she looked at Soren and slowly said, "With Vivian's ability, she should be able to help. After all, she is not an ordinary child. You should let her learn more. This can train her will, and it will be very helpful for her future." Soren continued to be silent. He was silent for a while, then he sighed and said, "All right. This time I'll let Vivian go with me. But you must protect her." The little girl's face instantly showed a happy and excited smile. She suddenly jumped into Soren's arms and hung on him like a koala. She kissed him on the cheek and said with a smile, "Big brother is so good. Vivian will be very obedient. She will never run around." Gloria nodded solemnly, then waved her hand to let the little girl come over. She put an exquisite badge on her chest and whispered a few words in her ear. As a high-grade northern witch, Gloria obviously knew the drawbacks of this way of fighting, but it was undoubtedly the most suitable way of fighting for a little girl. After all, at her current age she could not use many of the methods of wizards. The fighting style of a high-grade spellcaster required not only a lot of knowledge, but also a lot of experience. Now she should first familiarize herself with some simple and violent fighting styles. The matter was settled. There was an extra little girl in Soren's battle lineup. Although she was not very eye-catching, she was not to be underestimated. Chapter 105. Inside the Dark Forest. Soren carried Vivian on his back and moved forward. Gloria followed behind with light steps, and Aladdin was in front of them. The halfling didn't have much of an opinion about the addition of an 8-year-old girl to the adventurer team. After all, they had all seen Vivian's terrible explosive power. A round of arcane missiles could instantly kill a lot of enemies and could save lives at a critical moment. Even if the arcane missiles were used up, Vivian still had 9 level 0 spells and 1 level 2 spell which could provide a lot of support. Soren didn't expect that the little Vivian could grow so fast. It seemed that she was most likely the child of God. This was because she learned and memorized spells faster than Soren. The group trekked in the forest for a day, and by noon the next day, they were close to the location of the elemental portal. This was a portal left behind many years ago. Its location was relatively hidden, in a canyon near the Emerald Mountains. From the moment they arrived near the portal, the number of trees and weeds gradually decreased. Too much elemental energy would also affect the growth of plants. This was because too much elemental energy of a single type would form an effect similar to a domain, gradually repelling other elements. The land here was a little dry and there were weathered rocks everywhere. There were also some sculptures left from a long time ago. These were the sculptures of the spirit of the earth, a high-level earth element. It was also the spiritual incarnation of the legendary earth. They usually slept deep underground, and only some special methods could awaken them and summon them to the surface. After the group entered the canyon, their expressions became serious. Soren put Vivian down and let her walk behind with Gloria. At the same time he pulled out his curved sword and looked around vigilantly. Aladdin held a short sword in his hand and walked lightly with his feet, always observing the movements around him. How powerful were spellcasters? Looking at the two spells that Gloria released, he understood. As she chanted a spell, a magic aura fell on everyone. Greater agility. Agility was also known as Cat's Grace. Its effect was to temporarily increase agility by 4 points, up to a maximum of 25 points. Ordinary Featherweight was a level 2 spell and belonged to the category of single-target buffs. However, Gloria's spell was a level 6 spell and could be used for group buffs. The duration of the spell was also twice as long as Ordinary Featherweight. Soren's agility was boosted to 24 points, while Aladdin's agility was boosted to 25 points. After all, he was a purebred rogue, and his profession level had reached above level 10. His agility would definitely not be lower than his haste. When the second ray of light fell, Soren's movement speed had doubled. His normal sprinting speed had completely surpassed that of an Olympic champion, reaching a speed of 4 to 5 seconds per 100 meters. At the same time, his attack speed was also much faster than before, and the number of times he could swing his sword in a second had increased by at least 1. This spell was also a group buff. The number of people affected was determined by the level of the caster, and the duration was determined by the strength of the spell. Gloria stopped after casting the two spells, and casually cast an energy barrier on herself and Vivian. After that, there was basically nothing for them to do. Spellcasters were just that cool. Only when they encountered a situation that they could not resist would they continue to cast spells to turn the tables. Aladdin was quite excited as he stretched his muscles and bones. Then he jumped 4 or 5 meters away. After landing, he turned around and directly jumped onto the cliff. He ran 7 or 8 steps on the wall like acrobatics and then lightly landed on the ground. He said happily, "It's really been a long time since I cooperated with a wizard. I really missed the days when I was buffed by spells." Soren was also stretching his muscles and bones to adapt to the speed and agility after the spell buff. It took time to adapt to the sudden increase in agility, otherwise, it would be easy to deviate in battle. However, they were all experienced rogues and after a little exercise they grasped the extent of the spell buff. These two spells were the most commonly used spells by wizards to buff rogues. They could greatly improve their agility and combat explosiveness. Gloria nodded gently, looked at them and said, "Let's finish this quickly. These two spells can only last for half an hour." Half an hour was enough. Soren made a gesture to Aladdin next to him, and then the two of them moved forward from the east and west. Experienced rogues could replace warriors. At their level, rogues' ability to fight head-on was not bad. Aladdin made a gesture and then rushed into the valley. He raised his hand and threw out a hidden weapon. Elementals did not have any fatal weaknesses, and they did not have any vital organs. Undead could hit the spine and soul fire to achieve the effect of a fatal blow, but elementals could only exhaust the life energy in their bodies bit by bit. This group of creatures was immune to backstab. Of course, it was not absolute immunity. Just like when fighting against a lich, if you could hit the soul fire in its eye socket, you could also achieve the fatal damage of backstab, but the difficulty of achieving it was simply too high. To deal with these elementals, you had to accurately hit their elemental core, which was usually in a certain position in their body. The requirements for strength and weapons were extremely high. With the current equipment of Soren and Aladdin, it was basically impossible to penetrate the body of an elemental. Many supernatural creatures could only launch a fatal blow by hitting a certain point. Only the effect of fatal blow could be combined with backstab. This required the legendary ability, Insight into Weakness. Asterisk rumble. Asterisk with a dull sound, a 3-meter-tall monster was lured out. It looked like a human made of mud and stones. It had 4 limbs, a torso, and a head. However, its head was just a piece of rock, and the outline of its face could be vaguely seen. The weight of the earth elemental was more than half a ton. Every step it took left deep footprints on the ground. Its momentum was like a bulldozer, flattening all the stones in its way. Asterisk clang. Asterisk Soren raised his hand and threw out a throwing knife, but it was deflected by the solid rock in front of its chest. It only left a shallow mark on its body. It could not break through its defense. Fighting against elementals was such a disgusting thing. The earth elemental had a layer of natural elemental armor, which made it immune to all physical damage below 10 points. There was no doubt that it was like throwing rocks at them. The only difference was that this rock was bigger and fiercer. Earth Elemental, Grade 4. Challenge Rating, Level 9 Monster Level, 15 has spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 22 and 10 total attribute points, 90-100 special abilities, Elemental Armor, Bash, Elemental Trait, Earth Throw, Challenge Difficulty, A-. It was not a joke that it was twice as strong as the snake demon from the abyss. Just the A difficulty alone was enough to prove how difficult it was to deal with this kind of elemental creature. Soren and Aladdin pounced at the earth elemental from the left and right. They nimbly twisted their bodies and leaped, dodging the earth elemental's waving arms. The two jumped up at the same time and swung their weapons at the earth elemental's weak points. Part of its body was made of mud. Its limbs were made of rock, but its joints were made of mud. Clang, clang, clang. Soren's curved sword flashed in a cold light as he dodged the earth elemental's waving arms. The enemy's reaction speed was slower. A row of battle data appeared. Target hit. You have attacked the earth elemental 3 times. Dealt 5 for 3 points of physical damage. You have successfully enraged the target. Soren's hand was slightly numb. After cutting through the mud, he hit a rock. The impact was not small. It was like fighting with a rock. There wasn't even the slightest bit of pleasure from cutting flesh and bones with a knife. Aladdin's nimble figure also landed on the ground from the side. He circled around the earth elemental and seized the opportunity to jump up and stab the enemy's arm joint. The two's weapons were still of high quality and did not bend. But after this battle, no one knew. Attack the joints of the left and right legs. Soren shouted in a low voice. He passed through the gap between the earth elemental's legs and swung his curved sword at the enemy's knees. It was made of soft mud. As long as a supernatural creature maintained a human form, it would follow the basic rules. Without legs, it would not be able to move. Clang, clang, clang. A series of sparks appeared. The two were like butterflies flying through flowers. In just 1 or 2 minutes, the earth elemental's knees were hit more than 10 times. Finally, it reached a critical point and the earth elemental's legs broke. But what surprised Soren was that without its legs, it could still move with its legs. However, its balance and movement speed were greatly reduced. At least they had achieved their goal of attacking. Soren hit it a total of 12 times. The accumulated damage was about 60 points. Aladdin's attacks might be a little more, but his damage was not as high as Soren's. The earth elemental's level was 15, and a conservative estimate was that it had 150 basic HP. As a supernatural elemental, it also had an additional 100 or so HP. In other words, its HP could be close to 300 points, which was more than many high-grade warriors. The earth elemental did not pose much of a threat because of its reduced mobility. But the two of them surrounded it and hit it. It took them about 100 hits to finally disperse the elemental energy on its body. Soren signaled for the halfling to stop. In the end, he successfully finished off the earth elemental in front of him. Both of their weapons were bent, but the rewards were not small. Hit successful. You dealt 4 damage to the earth elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You received 2550 slaughter EXP. Chapter 106. This feeling was just too unbearable. Without rare-grade weapons, fighting against supernatural beings was like cutting meat with a blunt knife. It was even more unbearable than this. Soren and Aladdin looked at each other. Both sides looked at each other's slightly curled weapons and showed a helpless expression. There were very few rare-grade equipment, especially suitable weapons. Most of the time they had to find someone to customize them. Occasionally, the rare-grade weapons in the market were all common goods, which were not very useful for rogues like them who valued skills. Warriors had much lower requirements for weapons. Brother. When the battle was over, Gloria took Vivian's little hand and walked over. The little girl followed behind obediently. When she saw Soren's slightly curled weapons, she whispered, "Let me help you fix it." Repair. This was the most commonly used level 0 spell by wizards. As the little girl's white finger pointed, a very weak magic aura appeared, and then Soren's blade was repaired, almost returning to its original appearance. Repair was a very useful level 0 spell. It could be used to repair most non-rare grade equipment. Of course, it was the kind that was not completely damaged. If the wizard's strength was very high, they could also do things like Gloria and completely repair the messy room furniture with a snap of their fingers. Vivian had a lot of level 0 cantrips. She had twice as many spells as other low-grade adepts. The halfling had just taken out a whetstone from the bag and was about to sharpen his dagger, but after seeing Vivian cast a spell, he immediately handed over the weapon with a smile and said, "Little girl, can you fix it for me too?" "Okay." Vivian nodded gently, then stretched out her white finger. The dagger in the halfling's hand was quickly repaired, but in such a short time, Vivian had used 2 level 0 spell slots. The spell slots of low-grade spellcasters were never enough. As the elemental energy within the earth elemental's body was dispersed, the corpse of the earth elemental quickly weathered away. Its rocky body gradually collapsed and scattered on the ground like sand. At the same time, a pitch-black obsidian-like stone was revealed. Aladdin quickly pulled out the soil and sand, took the dark stone with a smooth surface, and directly handed it to Soren. He asked, "This thing is worth 500 Kindler coins?" "Yes." Soren nodded, reached out and took the elemental core, then put it in front of Gloria and said, "You should have studied golems. Can you see its quality?" The quality of such an elemental core was determined by the strength of the earth elemental. Most earth elementals were level 15, but there were also some level 16 and 17 earth elementals. The higher the level of the elemental core, the better the quality, which could be used to make better golems. Gloria took a look at it, and a faint magic light appeared on her fingertips. She then said, "The quality should be above average. In the north, it can be sold for 700 to 800 Kindler coins. The most common elemental cores in the north are water elemental cores and wind elemental cores. The demand for other elemental cores is higher. Naturally, the price was different in different regions. In the south, it was about 500 Kindler coins, but in the north, it could be as high as 700 to 800 Kindler coins. Is that valuable? A diamond is only about 500 to 600 Kindler coins, right?" The halfling's eyes immediately emitted a golden light, and the tired look he had after the battle disappeared without a trace. In an instant he seemed to be full of energy. He said excitedly, "Then let's continue. I just saw that there were more than 10 earth elemental cores inside. Altogether, it's worth about 8,000 to 9,000 Kindler coins." Soren also stood up. The earth elemental just now gave him 2550 slaughter EXP, and the other earth elementals should be about the same. If he killed all of them, he should be able to get about 30,000 slaughter EXP. This was the only opportunity in the early stages where he could restrain the monsters. At the same time, he could challenge them without too much risk. In the future, there would be very few opportunities to farm slaughter EXP like this. After all, elementals rarely appeared in the material plane. Among the 4 major elementals, he could only suppress the slow earth elemental. The agility of the earth elemental was 10 to 12 points, and its strength and constitution were close to 20 points, or even above 20 points. Soren's extraordinary agility completely restrained it. As long as he was careful enough and did not rush for quick success, he would not be hit. This was just like how Soren did not dare to fight with the ogre in the beginning. The difference in a single attribute was too big, and it was easy to suppress the ogre in a certain aspect. Therefore, as long as it was a profession in the legendary realm, they would not allow themselves to have too obvious shortcomings in a certain attribute. Of course, charm was an exception. Recently, the beastly style was popular, and pure men did not care about their charm. Gloria slightly frowned. She looked at the two of them and slowly said, "You're too slow. The spell duration is not enough for you to kill these monsters. The spells I remember are rarely repeated. Without the spell buffs, you will be in danger when fighting the earth elemental." Spell slots. The biggest limitation of wizards, and also the tool to balance the gap between them. Although Gloria had a lot of spell slots, as a high-grade witch she had twice as many spell slots as other wizards. However, she also had to retain her memory of life-saving spells, defensive spells, combat spells, and control spells. Like the buff spells just now, she must have only memorized 1 or 2. She would not waste a lot of spell slots on them. Without the buff spells, they would not be able to form an absolute suppression of attributes. If they were not careful, they might really be hit by the earth elemental once or twice. Just by looking at the size of the earth elemental, one would know that it would be very painful. What else? Aladdin looked at the others and whispered, "Let's kill some of them today, and then we'll kill some of them tomorrow after you've memorized the spells." Soren shook his head and said, "It's better to do it today. After all, this place is connected to the elemental plane. If we stay here for too long, it's easy to have accidents." He turned around and looked at Gloria next to him and said in a deep voice, "Do you have any enchanted weapons in your memory?" Gloria frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "This kind of spell is rarely used, so I basically can't remember it. However, I think I have a scroll for enchanted weapons." She was indeed a rich and beautiful northern witch. She did not even have the intention to remember the enchanted weapons spell that was necessary for a group of losers. This spell was the most frequently used spell by low-grade wizards before they had rare-grade equipment. It was usually used to buff the top burst damage professions in a group. Soon, she took out an inconspicuous spell scroll, opened it and activated it with magic. Then a magic light fell on Soren's curved sword. In an instant, Soren's originally normal curved sword had become like this. Item type: military curved sword +2, temporary enchanted, item grade: rare, grade 2. Item description: a weapon made of folded forged steel. Whether it's toughness or strength, it's far superior to ordinary weapons. Only blacksmiths with 150 points of weapon forging skill can forge such a weapon. Requirements: 10 points of strength. Effects: black steel +2 sharpness, +2 penetration, +1 energy damage. A grade 2 rare weapon was born just like that. Gloria was a high-grade witch, so the effect of the enchantment was much stronger than other wizards. The enchantment directly broke through from grade 1 to grade 2, but the limit was still a grade 2 rare weapon. Only advanced enchanted weapons could be enchanted to a higher level. There were even spells like legendary enchanted weapons, but unfortunately, not many people learned them. Gloria looked at Soren and whispered, "It can only last for 20 minutes. You better hurry up." The enchantment was naturally a temporary enchantment. A real rare weapon was forged with special materials and alchemy. Soren looked at the attributes of the curved sword and suddenly felt a surge of confidence. "It's enough for me to kill them." Aladdin, who was next to him, was envious. He also walked over with 2 short swords and looked up at her with longing. Gloria looked down at the small halfling and said, "There's only one scroll. You'll have to make do with it for now." Aladdin was a little disappointed, but he quickly followed. Soren's weapon was enchanted with a grade 2 rare weapon, so he naturally had to be the main attacker. When the halfling attracted another earth elemental, he immediately rushed over and slashed at the earth elemental's neck. A row of data appeared: target hit. You used a slash attack on the earth elemental. Dealt 7, +2, physical damage. Dealt 1 additional energy damage. You have successfully enraged the target. Although it only dealt 8 points of damage, Soren's damage was doubled after the enchantment. His first slash only dealt about 4 points of damage, and 2 slashes were comparable to 1 slash. As Feng twisted his body and swung his sword at the earth elemental rock, the 2 or 3 points of damage he had dealt to the earth elemental rock had now become 6 or 7 points of damage. The earth elemental rock was even left with a 2 to 3 centimeters deep mark. This was the penetration and sharpness effects of a tier 2 extraordinary weapon. When used against enemies with natural armor, Feng could penetrate their armor to a certain extent. Unfortunately, it wasn't the most powerful armor break attribute, or else it could directly cut through the elemental armor like tofu. 6 slashes. Each of Soren's slashes carried an additional 1 energy damage. He continuously slashed the earth elemental's arm 6 times, directly cutting off one of its arms from its shoulder. Soren's combat strength was off the charts with his rare weapon. He didn't even need Aladdin's help. As long as Soren covered him a little, Soren continuously cut off 2 of the earth elemental's arms and half of its legs. Finally, he cut off the earth elemental's head from its neck. P.S. That's all for today. I'll add more tomorrow. Chapter 107. With 5,000 slaughter EXP in hand, Soren was a little excited. He now had more than 10,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough to level up both his wizard and rogue classes at the same time. However, he still forcibly suppressed this impulse. Leveling up his basic classes could be put aside for now. He didn't need to level up to deal with these earth elementals, so it was better to leave it for the future. With his current ability, triggering the advancement was only a matter of time. Even if there were no conditions, he could create them himself, such as advancing into an assassin. There were only 3 prerequisites to become an assassin. The first was 100 points of stealth, the second was Heart of Slaughter, 100 kills, and the last was 50 points of alchemy, poisons. Stealth was already enough, Slaughter Heart was a passive ability, and assassins were cold-blooded and ruthless. As long as the number of targets he assassinated reached 100, he would automatically acquire the ability, Slaughter Heart, which would increase his willpower by 1. Soren had assassinated quite a lot of targets. As long as he was given some time, it would be a piece of cake for him to kill 100 people. As for the last 50 points of alchemy, he would need to spend some time learning how to make poisons. Assassin was one of his priorities for advancing into an assassin, but in the end he still chose Lurker, which was better at hiding. The NPCs in the storyline had the apprentice assassin class. They didn't need the ability, Slaughter Heart, but they had to complete a series of assassination missions to officially advance into an assassin. The battle ended. Just as Soren was about to find the elemental core from the corpse of the earth elemental, a row of data suddenly appeared. Battle ended. You dealt 7+2 / damage to the earth elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You received 2550 slaughter EXP. After killing again and again, your combat skills have become more flexible. You received information about the ability, reflex evasion. You received information about the ability, agile movement. Information about the ability appeared. Soren couldn't help but be stunned. The halfling next to him reached out and patted him, then picked up the elemental core and asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" "Hurry up and kill the next one, there are still a lot of them." Soren quickly came back to his senses and took a look at his own data. He didn't know if it was because of his accumulation or because of the battle just now, but he actually got 2 information prompts at once, both of which were advanced abilities for rogues. If he didn't spend ability points to obtain them, he could only comprehend them through battle. More often than not, the more experienced a person was, even if they were of the same professional level, they would have more specialties than those who did not fight much. Therefore, even if the 2 of them were of the same level, the difference between them would be like heaven and earth when they fought. Reflex evasion, personal ability. After a long period of combat, your reflexes have been gradually trained. When you encounter a sneak attack, assassination, or surprise attack, you won't appear to be caught off guard, because your trained reflexes are enough to deal with such unexpected situations. You can also rely on your reflexes to avoid the core area of the attack when you are hit by some area of effect attacks or spells. Conditioned reflexes +1 evasion roll, +5. Flexible movement, personal ability. After repeated battles, your footsteps have become more and more flexible, and you can easily avoid most of the attacks. Your footsteps are like dancing steps in battle. Flexible footsteps are suitable for people like you. When you face an enemy's attack, you can flexibly avoid a lot of damage. Evasion +1 evasion shifting, +5. These were 2 abilities that Soren was very familiar with. However, he was still quite surprised to get the information of 2 abilities at once. He had fought so many times at the beginning, but he didn't get any information about abilities. Now that 2 abilities appeared at once, it was definitely not a coincidence. It was very likely that there were other reasons. For example, he was now blessed with greater lightness and haste, or he was not hit by the enemy when he was fighting against the earth elementals just now. The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was high. This was because when he was training the sprint ability, he also needed to train with spells. At that time, he was blessed with lightness and greater haste, and then ran on the river to the limit. He fell into the river more than 10 times in a row before he finally mastered the sprint combat ability. Although he had fought a lot in the past, he didn't have the feeling of dancing on the tip of a knife like now. Being hit by the earth elementals was not a joke. Soren was highly focused throughout the whole process. He glanced at the halfling next to him and said in a deep voice, "Let me deal with the next one alone. I feel like I'm about to have a breakthrough in my combat skills." "You can do that?" The halfling was startled for a moment and then said, "Are you sure?" Soren nodded. There was a speculation in the past that when one's attributes were high, the speed of learning and mastering abilities would be increased. After all, 15 points of agility and 20 points of agility were 2 extremes. Many abilities required a corresponding physical condition to master. Soren now had 24 points of agility, which was higher than when he was training to master his abilities. After all, at that time, no spellcaster was willing to waste precious spells to train with his abilities. Wizards like to buff themselves with ingenious wisdom when learning high-grade spells, because high intelligence would help with the efficiency of learning spells. He might have reached the critical point of a breakthrough in his ability. The current high attribute state was probably several times more effective than usual, which was why there were 2 ability prompts in a row. 4 points of agility was equivalent to all the free attribute points of an 8-level rogue allocated to agility. It was indeed a bit risky to fight against the earth elementals alone. When Soren lured an earth elemental, he immediately felt the pressure increase. Without the halfling to cover him and attract attention, the frequency of his attacks was greatly reduced. He had to divert more energy to dodge the attacks. In the past, he could seize the opportunity to slash 7 or 8 times in a minute, but now he could only slash 2 or 3 times at most. Gloria seemed to be a little puzzled. After asking the halfling, she understood a little, but she looked at Soren with a strange expression. A breakthrough in battle? This seemed to be something that only legendary figures could do, right? How could Soren be so sure that he could break through his original fighting skills in just a few minutes of battle? Was he also a son of God? It shouldn't be. His talent was only a little better than ordinary people. In some areas he was close to the level of a genius, but there was still a big gap between him and the amazing talent of a son of God. Clang, clang, clang. Soren attacked again and again. He didn't pursue a short burst of power. He just wanted to make sure that he wasn't hit by the enemy. He moved around the earth elemental. Only when the enemy attacked would he seize the opportunity to counterattack. After the attack, the earth elemental would pull back its arm. At this moment, there was a 1-second gap between the attack. 1 second was enough for Soren to do a lot of things. He slashed the earth elemental's arm, then suddenly turned around and jumped onto its shoulder. Before landing, he slashed at the enemy's neck with all his strength. The battle was still going on. Soren's movements were obviously much more flexible. He seemed to have grasped the pattern of the earth elemental's attacks, and the rhythm of the battle gradually began to favor him. Clang, clang, clang. When Soren slashed at the earth elemental's neck several times, the enemy's tall body suddenly collapsed. The stone structure of its body began to decay, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into sand and stones. After killing the earth elemental in front of him, he didn't rush to take out the elemental core. Instead, he closed his eyes and recalled the battle just now. Then he let out a long breath. A notification popped up just now. Battle ended. You've dealt 8+2 / damage to the earth elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've received 2600 slaughter EXP. In the battle just now, you've learned a lot about your own fighting skills. You've received information about the ability, reflex evasion. You've received information about the ability, agile movement. This was already the second notification. According to Soren's past experience, there was at most one more notification before he could master the corresponding ability. That was to say, the next earth elemental would likely allow him to master 2 abilities at the same time. Soren waved his hand again at the halfling beside him. The halfling's expression was obviously a little speechless. However, Soren didn't have the mood to care about this. He took a short breath and excitedly lured the second earth elemental. At the same time, according to the rhythm of the attacks just now, he calculated the interval between the earth elemental's attacks. Clang, 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 clang. Gloria's expression became a lot more dignified. Soren actually became skillful in just a few minutes. Although the efficiency of the battle wasn't high, he was able to predict and dodge the earth elemental's attacks in advance. In the end, he was even able to hit the earth elemental's joints before it attacked, thus interrupting the earth elemental's next attack. The halfling's expression was already stunned. As a rogue, of course, he knew how difficult it was to do this. Soren's skills actually improved a lot in just a few minutes. Even he was a little surprised. Finally, when Soren killed the earth elemental in front of him, the long-awaited notification appeared. The battle is over. You've successfully learned the ability, reflex evasion. You've successfully learned the ability, agile movement. You've received information about the advanced profession, shadow dancer. Advanced requirements, reflex evasion, agile movement, 100 points in sneak, 50 points in evasion. Chapter 108. Did I trigger an advanced profession? I can't believe I actually triggered the advanced profession of shadow dancer. Soren glanced at the others with a hint of joy on his face and said slowly, "I've broken through. I feel like I've comprehended some skills." The halfling looked at him as if he was looking at a monster. Gloria's expression was also very strange. In just a few minutes, Soren's combat skills could be said to have improved in a straight line. This was also very surprising for a knowledgeable witch. Only Vivian didn't care about anything. She clapped her white little hands and said with sparkling eyes, "Brother is so powerful. Just now, I was completely playing with a monster." Two abilities that increased the ability to dodge. Although they were not as good as the legendary dodge, legendary reflex dodge, and legendary intuition dodge that he once had, it also allowed Soren to find the feeling of being at ease in battle. Even if the process of the battle was very dangerous, he could still find the calm feeling of dancing on the tip of a knife. Abilities could be improved little by little. As long as you understood the most basic ability and had the attributes to master it, it was only a matter of time before you improved it. As the number of battles increased, the basic ability would gradually become a high-grade ability. Ordinary dodge was a comprehensive ability, which was an extension of the agility class such as the rogue. Reflex dodge was adjusted according to the agility value. The higher the agility, the faster the nerve reflex, and the stronger the ability to dodge in sudden situations. Finally, there was intuition dodge. This was the most difficult and the most effective evasion skill. It required a very strong perception ability to predict any dangerous attacks in advance. Monks were experts in intuition dodge. If ordinary dodge was the improvement of the basic skills, then reflex dodge was the instinctive reaction in sudden situations. As for intuition dodge, it was the intuition of the next danger before the enemy launched an attack or was about to launch an attack. Intuition dodge was one of the most difficult abilities to train. Except for the monks and their advanced professions, it would take a long time for other professions to train. Moreover, there was a relatively high perception requirement. In the later stages, one would need to accumulate extraordinary perception. Monks had many evasion skills and they could also extend the ability, deflect flying arrows. The halfling stared at Soren and muttered, "Do you want another one?" Soren shook his head and said slowly, "I can't. I'm almost at my limit. If I want to improve further, I'm afraid I'll have to accumulate more combat experience. Recently, I've been comprehending something but I only found the opportunity to break through just now. To be able to comprehend two specialties in one go was already considered a good accumulation." Soren wasn't naive enough to think that he could level up again so quickly. There were strict requirements for his dodging techniques, and he had just reached the critical point of breaking through, which was why he was strengthened by the spell. The body's instinctive reaction was accumulated gradually. The more battles one fought, the stronger the instinctive reaction. In the end, it would develop the ability to dodge subconsciously. "Then let's speed up." Gloria looked deeply at Soren, then whispered, "There's only 10 minutes left for the spell." Soren nodded, picked up his curved sword, and entered the canyon. The halfling looked at him enviously, then followed with his short sword. This kind of breakthrough really needed talent. Not even 1 in 100 rogues could break through temporarily. They needed a long time to accumulate. A large altar could be seen in the canyon. It was surrounded by huge stone pillars that were about 10 meters high. The center was divided into 9 steps, and in the center was a stone platform that looked like a compass. The earth elementals on the periphery were a little better, but the earth elementals inside were obviously different. They were larger in size and there were more rock structures all over their bodies. Even their appearance was closer to that of a human. "Be careful." Soren clenched his curved sword and said in a deep voice, "These earth elementals may be advanced elites. Among them there may be guys who have learned the skill, Earth Throw. If you see them grabbing rocks, run away immediately." Earth Throw. It was a spell-like ability. The earth elementals could condense energy and throw a boulder. The damage could reach up to 100 points. Being hit by the boulder would result in instant death. Most elementals had no intelligence, even lower than the undead. The intelligent elementals were legendary creatures such as the Jinn, the Water Jinn, the Earth Jinn, and so on. Such elementals belonged to divine creatures. Many of them were born with the divinity of demigods. Occasionally they could even summon powerful elemental gods. One of the more famous summoning spells was the legendary Wish. The Jinn would fulfill some of your wishes according to the principle of equivalent exchange, including resurrecting the dead. These were the oldest creatures. Most of them slept in the elemental plane. Most of the elementals that appeared in the material plane had low intelligence. They relied entirely on instinct to move in some areas. Occasionally they would respond to the summoning of the spellcasters and serve them. The earth elementals in front of them were like this. They had been here for a long time and would not leave the canyon. Soren made a gesture to the halfling next to him. The two once again joined forces to attract the attention of the earth elementals. The halfling was responsible for restraining the enemy while Soren seized the opportunity to deal damage. Gloria glanced at the altar from afar. Her delicate eyebrows slightly wrinkled as if she was a little uneasy. She looked up at the sky. There seemed to be a falcon circling in the sky. Because the vision in the canyon was not good, she was not sure if it was a wild falcon flying over. Most wizards were very vigilant. Gloria once again cast a protective spell and then approached the front. A pure-blooded spellcaster would never use up all their spells. They would always leave a few spells to deal with unexpected situations. 1, 2, 3. When Soren dealt with the 9th Earth Elemental, the situation in the battle suddenly changed. The Earth Elemental, which was obviously much taller, waved its hand. A huge rock that weighed about half a ton automatically flew into its hand. It suddenly threw the rock at the little mouse that had been harassing it. The huge rock with the whistling sound of the wind was like a black shadow falling from the sky. In an instant, it smashed a deep hole in the ground. Aladdin? Soren shouted, and the speed of his attack slowed down a little. A voice with lingering fear came from behind the rock. The small halfling came out from behind the rock, patted his chest and said, "You scared me to death. Just a little bit more and I would have turned into a meat patty." With the agility of a rogue, it was not difficult to dodge if they were prepared in advance. If it was a warrior, it would be more troublesome. The Earth Elemental's Earth Throw could only be used once or twice a day. Soren did not dare to be careless. At the same time, he activated the ability of Shadow Strike. When attacking the advanced Earth Elemental, there was an additional 6 shadow damage. The shadow energy could directly attack the energy core of the Earth Elemental. As long as it was successfully touched, it could erode the elemental energy it formed. The halfling seemed to be angered. At the same time, he also activated the energy attack of Shadow Strike. This was the most common spell-like attack for rogues below legend. The advanced Earth Elemental quickly fell to the ground. After Soren took out the elemental core, he rushed to the altar. The nearby Earth Elementals were almost killed. Their spell buffs were also about to expire. The scattered Earth Elementals were still wandering around. They had an alert range. If they did not get close, they would not be noticed. "Where's the treasure?" The halfling excitedly approached the altar and whispered, "It's empty here. There's nothing here." Soren looked around vigilantly and slowly said, "There should be a secret compartment up there. Don't rush up there. Let me see if there are any traps nearby." After saying that, he walked around the altar a little. There were scattered Earth Elementals nearby, but it was very troublesome to deal with them without any spell buffs. Although Soren felt that it was a pity to lose the slaughter EXP, it was better not to kill them all. This kind of place connected to the portal was more special. There might be things from the elemental plane coming over. Killing them would easily alarm things like the spirit of the earth. He had suffered a loss because of this before. After killing all the young ones, an old one would suddenly pop up. He quietly made a gesture to the back. Gloria immediately prepared to cast a spell, and Vivian stood nervously next to her. When they passed by a stone pillar, Soren gently pressed on it. Then the altar made a loud rumbling sound, and a secret compartment appeared in front of the others. The portal needed energy to maintain, and most of the sacrifices offered to the elementals were gems. These things would not be exposed outside. Generally, they would be somewhere in the altar. He made a gesture to the halfling next to him. The halfling immediately walked up excitedly, then carefully took out several gems and quickly put them into his pocket. Soren walked slowly along the altar. His figure paused for a moment, then he took out a yellow stone from the left corner of the altar and put it into his pocket in the blink of an eye. It was not very eye-catching and it did not have any obvious aura. If one did not look carefully, they would even think that it was an ordinary stone. The size of the stone was about the same as a pebble. The surface was quite smooth, but it was heavy when he picked it up. It weighed almost 3 pounds. "You got it?" Soren immediately looked at the halfling and said in a deep voice, "Take it and leave quickly. The portal here is no longer working. It may alarm the creatures from the elemental plane." The altar made a loud rumbling sound. It seemed that the whole ground had sunk a little. The halfling quickly put things into his multi-dimensional bag. Fortunately, Kindler did not have many things. Most of them were all kinds of gems. High-grade elementals would sometimes eat them directly as if they were chewing beans. Dong dong dong. A loud sound came from under the altar. Soren did not care about the rest of the gems. He picked up the halfling and ran out of the altar. There was probably an elemental spirit sleeping below. He hoped that it was not something like the spirit of the earth. My gems. The sorrowful cry of the halfling was still echoing. Gloria had quickly cast a spell, and the four figures directly flew out of thin air. Group flight. The altar shook faster and faster, and the center even began to collapse. When Soren and the others flew to a height of about 300 meters, a huge rock arm suddenly stretched out from the ground, followed by a rock giant about 10 meters tall. It made a dull sound and it looked like it was roaring, but there was no trace of anyone nearby. The huge figure circled around the canyon, and then returned to the bottom of the altar, which had turned into a sand-like ruin. That was close. The halfling wiped his cold sweat, looked at the huge elemental monster and murmured, "We can't deal with this big guy." Soren's expression was relatively calm, but he could not help but curse in his heart. I knew they were hiding something. How can a legendary level quest be announced so casually? It turns out that there is a guardian below. With more adventures came more experience. In fact, Soren did not believe that a legendary level quest would only have a few earth elementals guarding it. That was why he had arranged for Gloria to walk behind and use flight to leave when necessary. The monster below was probably a rock giant, an advanced branch of the earth elementals. Its strength was only a little lower than the elemental elders, and its monster level was about 18 to 20. This was not something they could deal with. Soren glanced at the canyon from afar, calculating in his heart what kind of strength could safely kill it. This guy must give a lot of slaughter EXP. Chapter 109. Let's get out of here quickly. A gentle wind element made Soren's figure gently land on the ground. It took a lot of energy to maintain group flight. Gloria looked up at the sky and said, "Let's go into the forest first. There's something wrong with that eagle in the sky." The disadvantage of flight was obvious. Without a lot of abilities, it would be extremely weak when flying. Wizards who often flew liked to use feather wing or dragon wing. Directly relying on magic energy to fly was not advisable. Wizards who were not at the legendary level or above would not be able to withstand it. Also, the flexibility and mobility of flying were very poor, and it was easy to become a live target for long-range units. Melee wizards basically had no fighting power in the sky because there was a saying that power comes from the ground. When in the air, it was impossible to use power out of thin air. If the left foot can step on the right foot, then can't we fly to the astral plane? Ugh. Soren looked up at the sky and found a strong falcon hovering in the sky. It had circled around their heads once, but it did not leave. It was still hovering in the sky. This was very unusual. A wild falcon would not fly above their heads for no reason. Aladdin also looked at the sky and muttered, "There's still some time. Why are you in such a hurry? In a second or two at most, I would be able to pick up a dozen more gems. That's thousands of Kindler gems." Soren glanced at him and said coldly, "If you have money, you have to be alive to spend it." The rock giant that just appeared was close to the legendary level. Our attacks couldn't hurt it at all. Even Gloria could only protect herself in front of it. There's no way she could take care of us. This trip is not small. I saw that you just got at least dozens of gems. The halfling laughed and said awkwardly, "I just feel that it's a pity. After all, it's all money." He looked up at the falcon in the sky and followed Soren into the forest. He then opened his multi-dimensional bag and counted a little. I took about 40 or 50 gems and there were some Kindler gems in there. But I didn't care about taking them. I first picked something that looked valuable and put it in. How much is it worth? The halfling's valuation ability did not seem to be high. He could not even calculate how much these gems were worth. Don't underestimate the appraise skill just because it wasn't that great. Sometimes it was really useful. Soren still remembered the time when he teamed up with someone to steal something from a dragon's den, but they only managed to lure the dragon away for less than 10 seconds. In just 10 seconds, his partner had stolen 3 treasures from the 5-meter-tall treasure mountain in the dragon's den, each of which was worth more than 10,000 Kindler coins. This was the effect of appraisal. Adventurers often encountered unexpected situations, and they might not have the time to slowly pick up the loot. Sometimes they had to grab something and stuff it into their pockets. Whether or not it was worth anything depended on one's eyesight and luck. Soren took a look at the multi-dimensional bag. There were a lot of gems in it, but the total value was definitely more than 7,000 or 8,000 Kindler coins because these were all relatively good quality gems. The elemental plane was rich in gems and minerals. Sometimes if you were lucky you could even find obsidian, bullhead gold, open air ore and so on the surface. Aladdin only got some high-end goods. In addition to the elemental cores he got at the beginning, the three of them still had a few thousand kindler coins. The elemental plane rejected the outside world, and it was difficult for high-grade wizards to enter. It was not as easy to enter as other planes. The fire elemental plane had the most minerals, but the average temperature was about 100 degrees. Professionals with ordinary physiques would be roasted as soon as they entered, and they would be able to smell the fragrance of meat in a while. They could not move around freely without casting spells. Basically, the four elemental planes were similar. Although the earth elemental plane was not so harsh, it was a world with supergravity. A weak wizard like Gloria could not walk more than 1 or 2 kilometers. Among the four elemental planes, the earth elemental plane was the place where melee legendary professions entered the most. This was because they could use the supergravity of the space to train their strength. However, when they first entered, their combat power would be reduced by more than half. Supergravity field. Gloria glanced at the gems and soon her eyes lit up. She took out 2 crystal-like gems and slowly said, "I want these 2 things. They are the materials I need. You can divide the rest." "All right." Vivian should also take a share. After all, she also contributed today. The little girl looked up at her, and her beautiful big eyes were shining. It seemed that she was also very interested in gems. Aladdin saw that the 2 women were staring at him, and he could not help but rub his forehead and said, "Of course. Of course. Since Vivian is also here, she can also take 10%. This is an old rule among adventurers." A good gem was worth hundreds of kindler coins. This trip did not encounter too many risks, and he easily earned thousands of kindler coins. It was enough for him to go back to his hometown and enjoy for a while. Halflings were standard hedonists. They spent at least half of the money they earned to make themselves more comfortable, especially their houses. If they had enough money, they would try their best to decorate their houses with the highest standards. Sometimes they would even decorate their houses with some high-end art pieces. Soren had been to a lot of places. The others looked at each other and quickly left. Shortly after Soren left, a strong figure landed in the forest. It was a tall drool with oil paint on his body. He had not been in contact with people for a long time. The hair on his face was very long and he did not take care of it. He looked like a savage. Behind him, another agile figure landed. It was a beautiful half-elf drool. A beautiful nightingale landed on her shoulder and carefully combed her feathers. The savage drool looked at the footprints on the ground, then frowned and said, "They escaped. These guys have disturbed the sleeping elements, and the spirit of the earth is also showing signs of awakening. Nightingale, you'd better tell this to the Earth Walker. Only he can appease these angry elements." Chapter 110. There was a slight vibration inside the canyon. It was like a relatively weak earthquake. There was no obvious tremor, but the vibration was real, and it came from the ground at a stable frequency. It felt like a heartbeat full of rhythm. The remaining earth elementals in the canyon seemed to be in a daze. After a while, they gathered together and drilled into the ground along the altar. No one knew where they went. About 10 kilometers away from the canyon, on the edge of the Emerald Mountains, there was a dragon's den built on a cliff. Most of the locations of the dragon's den were very steep. This was the dragon's first line of defense. It was difficult to reach by normal means because it was surrounded by cliffs. This point was very fake in the tavern stories because the heroes all walked all the way to the dragon's den. In fact, most of the time to enter the dragon's den, one needed to climb cliffs hundreds of meters high. At this time many tools were needed. Heavy armor warriors were the most miserable at this time. If there was no spellcasting profession to support flight, it would take a long time to climb up. The geographical factor was only the first trouble. There were many traps near the dragon's den, including very deadly spell traps. If you were unlucky, you would find that the dragon's den was a small maze with many monsters guarding it. These were the dragon's slaves who worked and provided food for them. But most of the time only the old dragons would be guarded by monsters. The young dragons were not so confident that they could control those slaves all the time. This was the den of a copper dragon. There were obvious signs of modification around the dragon's den. The dragon had flattened the stone walls near the mountain, making it a vertical 90-degree angle. It was difficult for creatures that could not fly to come up. In front of the den was a large platform. The dragons needed space to take off and land. It was more difficult to flap their wings to fly. When they hunted, they swooped down and then glided into the sky in an arc. A copper-colored dragon was crawling in its lair. It looked almost the same as the legendary dragons. The only special thing was that its forelimbs were thicker, and the color of its pupils was very light. It looked like turquoise. The physical characteristics of dragons were very important because physical characteristics represented their most ferocious physical attacks. Dragon breath was not the most deadly attack. Many spells could resist dragon breath and so could shields. Experienced high-level adventurers knew that Dragon Wing Strike and Dragon Claw Tear were more dangerous than Dragon Breath. This was originally a sleeping dragon, but now it had woken up. It was lying on top of a pile of treasures that was almost half a story high. A dazzling golden light shone, and its ferocious dragon head looked in the direction of the canyon. It wasn't known if it had evolved into an Elder Eye Demon or a Giant Eye Tyrant, but it was definitely a legendary level eye demon that flew out of its nest. Soon, a group of gray dwarves entered its perception range. It flew over quietly without any sound. One of the eyeballs on one of its tentacles shot out a ray of light, and instantly shot through the head of a gray dwarf. The rest of the gray dwarves screamed in horror. Those who tried to escape were instantly killed by the ray, and the rest kneeled on the ground, trembling. The huge eye demon opened its mouth and swallowed half of a gray dwarf's corpse. As it chewed with its bloody mouth, drops of blood and flesh spilled out. Its central eye coldly glanced at the survivors. With a flash of magic, the surviving gray dwarves were all stunned. They respectfully knelt in front of the eye demon and said, "Master." Their dull eyes gradually recovered. The soul imprint of the charm spell had begun to take effect. The gray dwarves' eyes became clear, but they respectfully carried the corpse of their companions and began to serve their new master. Soren and the others went back the way they came from. The halfling was still happily counting the gems. Gloria gently lifted her long hair and looked behind her. Her expression seemed a little strange. Before leaving, she seemed to have felt something. It was an energy wave from the underground. Soren carried Vivian on his back and walked at the back. Suddenly he seemed to have noticed something. His whole body had goosebumps. His hand unconsciously held the curved sword, and at the same time he looked up at the sky in the distance. The halfling also felt the same. The gems in Aladdin's hand fell to the ground, and in a flash he pulled out his dagger. Gloria's body stiffened for a moment. She subconsciously cast an energy shield, and then looked into the distance with her eyebrows knitted. A ferocious and huge figure swept across the sky like a shadow. Soren's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Red Copper Dragon." It was an adult red copper dragon. It didn't even notice the tiny humans who had cast invisibility on the ground. It had just woken up and was very hungry. The thing it wanted to do the most now was to catch an adult male split-hoofed bull and have a good meal. The whole team was shocked by the flying dragon. All the creatures within the range of the dragon's aura were affected. The only one who was relatively normal was the little girl on Soren's back. She raised her little head and looked at the dragon in the sky and murmured, "It looks so majestic." He didn't know what was going on in Vivian's little head, but there was a longing expression on her cute little face. But at this time no one paid attention to her. Until the dragon flew past, the others were slightly relieved. Soren couldn't help but quicken his pace. The halfling also put away the gems and trotted forward to catch up with them. It was an adult dragon. It had a legendary challenge rating. They didn't want to meet such a creature now. Behind them, Droll, who was chasing after the dragon, suddenly stopped. He pulled out a feather from his messy hair and quickly chanted a spell. His whole body turned into an eagle in an instant. The eagle spread its wings and soared hundreds of meters in the sky. After glancing at the direction the dragon left, it turned around and flew in the other direction. An adult red copper dragon that was sleeping near the Emerald Mountains had awakened. This matter must be reported to the Earthwalker. Even if the metallic dragons were relatively kind-hearted, they were still very dangerous. All dragons were somewhat temperamental. When they saw a living dragon flying past, no one had the intention to stay. They hurried through the night and finally returned to the original elven village the next day. The village was still very peaceful. No creature would attack the elves at will, because it would attract the revenge of the forest patrol. Not only did it require powerful force to deter the enemy, but it also required some cruel means. When the elves took revenge, there was no elegance to speak of. They were also incomparably bloody when dealing with foreign enemies. Otherwise, the nearby ogres, mixed-blood orcs, and wild monsters would not have migrated to other places one by one. The hands of the elven patrol were stained with blood. The creatures they hunted were definitely not less than Soren. Every race had a group of cold-blooded and ruthless warriors. They were different from the ordinary civilians. Their mission was to fight and kill. Soren and the others finally returned to the inn. The halfling couldn't wait to distribute the spoils of war. Soren got 40%, Aladdin got 30%, Gloria got the first 2 crystals, and only got 3 elemental cores. In the end, even Vivian got 10 gems. The little girl held the gems in front of Soren with a satisfied face. Because her hands were small, she couldn't hold so many gems. However, her face showed a cute expression as if she was presenting a treasure. Soren just gently patted her little head and let her put the gems away. So she smiled and put the gems into an exquisitely embroidered multi-dimensional bag with silver edges. It was already full of many things. After the distribution, Soren finally had the chance to take a look at the legendary item. Chapter 111. Inside a dark room. Soren carefully took out the heavy stone. Vivian had been following Gloria all this time, and the Northern Witch had to teach her knowledge at night. Maybe she felt something, but the little girl was obviously working harder than before. She had almost finished reading all the books that Gloria brought with her. At this rate, she would soon become a qualified wizard. Soren also thought that it was good for the little girl to learn more. After all, it was not easy to find a senior witch to teach her. He held the heavy stone in his palm and tried to identify it at the same time. Soon a row of data appeared. Item type, elemental crystal stone, earth, item grade. Grade 1 legendary item, item description. A special treasure from the earth elemental plane. It was formed by the spiritual energy of the earth. It was endowed with special magic. When activated, it can cast powerful spells. It doesn't seem to be a single item. From the patterns on the edge, it can be seen that it was once part of something. Requirements, none. Special effects, summon earth elemental 7 days once, stone skin 3 days once. Grade 1 legendary equipment. Soren's mouth revealed a smile. After such a long time, he finally got his first legendary equipment. In this world, equipment that could increase attributes was very rare. Most of the equipment could produce additional effects or cast certain spells. For example, the wizard's staff. Most of the staff could not increase the power of their spells. The most common effect was that it could store spells. Gloria had a staff that stored spells in her multi-dimensional bag. The staff could be used more often than the spell scroll, but it could not store more advanced spells. There was a relatively simple rule to determine whether an item was a legendary item or not. That was, legendary items could automatically restore the number of spells they could cast, and the requirements to use them were lower. The staff could not be activated without the corresponding ability. However, many legendary items could still activate their power even if they did not have the ability to cast spells. Soren also had a deadwood staff in his multi-dimensional bag. It was a weapon similar to a staff, and it was enchanted with a specific number of spells. However, legendary equipment did not have such a number of times. As long as it was a legendary item, many of them could automatically recover over time. Summon Earth Elemental. Soren gently stroked the smooth stone and murmured, "This seems to be a 6-circle spell. Although it can only be used once every 7 days, it should be enough to deal with many situations." Earth Elementals had a monster level of around 15. Summoning an Earth Elemental to help him would have a huge effect. Just by looking at how Soren had been slashing at the iron golems for a long time, one could tell how strong they were as meat shields. They could even fight against the iron golems for a long time. The second spell he could use was the Stone Skin spell, which was one of the most important defensive spells for wizards. If a mage's armor could block 1 or 2 attacks, then Stone Skin would allow a wizard to stand in the middle of a crowd and let them attack him. A mage's armor could only provide a few dozen points of defense, and an advanced mage's armor could only provide 100 or so points of defense. However, Stone Skin could withstand more than 150 points of physical damage. According to Soren's current attack power of 30 points per slash, he would need at least 4 or 5 slashes to break through the protective energy of Stone Skin. However, Stone Skin also had a drawback. After casting Stone Skin, one's dexterity would decrease by around 2 points. Since it was not an energy field like a mage's armor, Stone Skin would also be broken after receiving high damage, but it could greatly reduce the damage received. Summon Earth Elemental 6-circle spell. After casting the spell, a portal will be opened to the Earth Elemental plane. Summon an Earth Elemental with 12 basic HP, 10% chance to summon an advanced Earth Elemental with 16 basic HP, 5% chance to summon an elite Earth Elemental with 20 basic HP, and 1% chance to summon an Earth Elemental Lord or Earth Elemental Elder. After casting the spell, the Earth Elemental has a 10% chance to attack the caster. The caster must complete a will test to control the Earth Elemental's will. The Earth Elemental will then act according to the caster's will. The difficulty of the will test depends on the level of the Earth Elemental. The higher the level of the Earth Elemental, the more likely it is to trigger the will test. The basic HP was the minimum HP of each level. If the HP was 12, then 10 levels of creatures would have at least 120 HP. Soren's rogue class had a basic HP of 6, and the wizard class had a basic HP of 4. Therefore, if an Earth Elemental with a base HP of 20 was summoned, its meat shield ability could even resist the giant dragon for a period of time. But all supernatural creatures had a much higher basic HP. And this basic HP could be added with Constitution. That was to say, as long as the Constitution was higher than 10, every 2 points of Constitution would give an additional 1 point of HP. That was why supernatural creatures had such a strong vitality. They could not die even after being slashed so many times. Soren was the same. The higher the HP, the stronger the vitality. Ordinary people would start to feel dizzy after losing a little more blood, but as long as his blood loss did not exceed the critical point of death, his combat power would not be reduced too much. Vitality was not only reflected in this little bit, but also in many other aspects. For example, the reaction after being poisoned, the effect of resisting some deadly spells, and the influence of strength in a seriously injured state, etc. Stone Skin, Level 4 Spell. After casting the spell, the caster will be covered by a layer of Stone Skin energy, absorbing any physical damage below 10 points. Each point of spell energy can increase the absorption effect by 1 point. Attacks below the absorption effect of the protective energy will not cause any damage to the caster. The caster can withstand a maximum of 200 points of attack. After casting Stone Skin, the caster's dexterity will be reduced by 2 points. Stone Skin focused more on the casting level and the spell's power. Ordinary Stone Skin could only protect against attacks below 10 points of power. If an ordinary person slashed with a sword, it would take about 20 slashes to break through the protective energy. During this time, the caster would not suffer any damage. But if it was a profession, as long as the attack power exceeded 10 points, then the damage received would be offset by the protective energy. The slash might only cut through the muscle layer. 10 points of spell energy could increase the attack power of Stone Skin to 20 points. Therefore, Stone Skin was the most troublesome spell cast by a wizard close to the legendary level. Any physical attack below 40 points would not be able to break through their protective Stone Skin. Soren needed to cast Sword Form, Heavy Slash, at least 5 times to break through the protective energy of Stone Skin. Among all the protective spells, the most useful one was still the Mage Armor at field, because it was a protective energy field. Unfortunately, the Mage Armor could only withstand a limited amount of damage, so it could be easily broken in 1 or 2 attacks. Therefore, in high-intensity battles, wizards would prioritize casting Stone Skin on themselves. This was because it could withstand more attacks and could last for a longer period of time. Soren solemnly put away the equipment. This was the best legendary equipment he could get before the time of troubles. As long as he had it, he could even try to slay a dragon. Of course, it was not the kind of dragon he encountered today, but the more common pterosaur, earth dragon, and wyvern. If a white dragon was willing to fight with him on the ground, Soren had about a 50% chance of killing an adult white dragon. Because white dragons were the lowest level of pentashade dragons, among the pentashade dragons such as black dragons, red dragons, and green dragons, the white dragon's spellcasting ability was the weakest. They were often seen at Soren's destination, which was the range of the Frost Kingdom. At the thought of slaying a dragon, Soren seriously considered the success rate of slaying a dragon. Because there was a very powerful profession in the warlock class called Dragon Disciple. There were only 2 ways for a Dragon Disciple to advance. The first way was to awaken the dragon's blood on their own. While retaining the warlock's spellcasting ability, they would continue to gain the attribute bonus of the dragon's blood. This method of advancement had very high requirements, and most of them were produced in dragons. It was difficult for a Dragon Disciple to advance into a Dragon Disciple if the dragon's blood was too diluted. The second way was to slay a dragon. The warlock's bloodline talent was relatively special. It had a very powerful fusion and absorption ability. Even if a warlock did not have the dragon's blood, after slaying a dragon, they could transfer the dragon's ability to themselves through a special advancement ceremony. After this ceremony, the warlock could advance into a dragon disciple. Their original spellcasting ability would not be weakened, but they could gain the dragon's strength, constitution, intelligence, and charm bonus. A dragon disciple with a profession level of about 10 could get a total of about 12 points of additional attribute bonus. 24 profession levels, and the basic HP would become the same as a warrior's, 10. After entering the legendary realm, the HP would be the same as a barbarian's, 12. It could be said that they were a boss-level character who could cast spells and fight hand-to-hand. In the past, there were many warlocks who died on the path of advancing into a dragon disciple, but those who succeeded became very powerful. They liked to call themselves dragon's descendants. The growth of a dragon disciple was undoubtedly very strong, but the disadvantage was that the slaughter EXP needed for the profession level was about 3 times that of other advanced professions. They would be punished by the growth of the dragon's EXP. Dragons needed hundreds of years to grow, and their strength would also be limited by the same. Among all the spellcasters, a dragon disciple was the only one who did not need to reach the high grade, profession level 15, and did not need any transformation ceremony to have a lifespan of more than 500 years. In theory, a level 10 dragon disciple could live for 2,000 years. If Soren felt that it was possible, he wanted to try to let Vivian advance into a dragon disciple, and the sooner the better. She really was a deity. If she continued to advance in this way when she reached the legendary realm, it would be hard to say who would win even if she were to fight against a deity who had fallen from the mortal world. P.S. There are 2 chapters today. Everyone please vote for me. There will be more chapters tomorrow. Chapter 112. It was getting late into the night. Soren kept the elemental stone close to his body and then checked his data display. He had accumulated more than 34,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough for him to level up several professions. However, the problem in front of him now was whether he should continue to level up as a wizard or level up as a rogue to prepare for his profession advancement. Wizards needed time to memorize spells, but they had great potential for growth. He estimated that he wouldn't have much time to memorize spells in the next half a month. Rogues could directly advance after leveling up. Assassins and shadow dancers were also very powerful professions. Spellcasters are really built with time and money. Soren frowned and looked out of the window. He seemed to hear something moving. It might be the village's elven patrol. After midnight, it was best not to move around outside. Even if you were just strolling around, others wouldn't believe that you were strolling. They would suspect you and even treat you as a thief or a robber with bad intentions. There was a faint cry of surprise. However, it wasn't very loud and disappeared after a while. Soren quietly looked outside and saw torches in the distance. It seemed that there were more than 10 elven guards gathered near the temple. Every village had a very small temple, where priests who served the elven god lived. Most of the temples were built in the cities, and the priests in the villages were apprentice priests with a profession level of about 5. The divine spells they could use were limited. Soren thought for a while and decided to level up as a rogue first. Compared to wizards, he was more familiar with rogues. Whether it was fighting or dealing with various situations, he could only use about half of the effect of leveling up as a wizard. However, Soren could use 120% of the effect of leveling up as a rogue. Moreover, rogues could also advance a second time if the conditions allowed, and it was even possible to advance to the limit for the 3rd time. Here, it was necessary to mention the rogue advancement. There were many branches to the rogue advancement. Godly thief, rogue swordsman, bounty hunter, assassin, stealth, and lurker, and shadow dancer, which was more inclined to the ability to steal and hide. In addition, there were semi-advanced professions Ronin, dark guard, undead hunter, and so on. There were also legendary professions, shadow walker, night mask, treasure hunter, shadow assassin, and so on. The professions that advanced for the 3rd time were very special. They were already in the realm of the gods and the types were quite rare. The most representative was the Shadow Master. The second job advancement depended on whether or not the requirements were met. If the job advancement was successful, the job advancement would be replaced. Soren once wanted to advance from Lurker to Shadow Lord, but he failed in the end. He couldn't get the Shadow Dancer's shard. In the Battle of the Ogres in Whiterun, the Storm Lord was a priest and a barbarian. At the same time, she advanced to the legendary profession, Storm Lord. According to Soren's estimation, her Storm Lord profession level was at most level 3. If he had gotten the Shadow Dancer's shard, then his level 5, Lurker, would have been replaced with a level 5, Shadow Walker, and finally become a level 1 Shadow Master. The overall profession level didn't change, but because of the advancement, there would be a great improvement in ability. If Soren remembered correctly, the god he was most familiar with was the Shadow Dancer. His profession level was level 10 Rogue, level 10 Night Mask, level 5 Shadow Dominator, level 5 Shadow Weaver. In addition, there was also the level 10 Shadow God, given by the Shard of Divinity. The total profession level was 40. If you wanted to stand side by side with the gods, you must learn to restrain yourself. Restrain your desire to learn random abilities. Dividing your energy would never be better than focusing on one field. Strictly speaking, Soren's path of improvement was still in the direction of Shadow Master, because the Shadow Master required a high rogue level and casting ability. Advancement had many requirements for attributes, skills, and abilities. Generally, the higher the attribute of a person's ability, the more advanced professions they could choose. Now, even if he didn't change his profession to Shadow Wizard, he could reach the casting level to advance to the Shadow Master. If there was no casting level, then the only way to advance was the Shard of Divinity. Soren sat at the table and thought about his future path of improvement. This was a very cautious decision because if he chose wrong he would have to take a lot of detours. In the end he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal. He wouldn't be able to integrate his abilities and he would just be sloppy in everything. If he couldn't get the Shard of Divinity, the final result would be nothing more than a half-baked legendary profession. The saints could kill him with one hand. In the beginning he dared to fight against a purebred legendary wizard because he was a purebred legendary rogue. When a certain ability was strengthened to the limit, the last thing he would touch was the power of the law. To advance to an assassin, I need to master more than 200 points of alchemy and poison to reach the maximum level. Then the second advancement will change the assassin into a spectre assassin. I can already release level 3 spells, so I can probably become a spectre assassin when I reach a higher level. In the future, if I can go to the orcs' territory, I can also learn the spell-like ability Mirror Image. My combat power will undoubtedly be much stronger than before. Soren took out a piece of paper and began to write densely packed symbols and words on it. These were the profession's levels in his past memory, as well as the abilities that could be mastered through training. Advanced professions all focused on one aspect. If a rogue could do everything, whether it was stealing, fighting, or sneaking, then other advanced professions focused on one aspect. That was, they specialized in one aspect. Soren wrote a lot of words on the paper, estimated to be thousands of words and symbols. When he finished listing all kinds of memory information, it was already close to dawn. From an assassin to a spectre assassin. There are a total of 3 abilities, all of which are very difficult to train. Soren looked at the ability data on the table, then drew a few lines, connected the spectre assassin's ability to the wizard level, and finally included it in the Shadow Lord's advancement requirements. He frowned and said, "There are still 12 abilities, 5 free attribute points, more than 500 skill points, and a piece of Shard of Divinity." Soren sighed and then said to himself, "Sure enough, my innate attributes are still not enough. Without the genius attributes of the hero mode, it's impossible to advance in a short time with my current talent." After listing the data, Soren took out another piece of paper and began to calculate the ability bonus of the Shadow Dancer. Advanced professions all had some innate abilities. The ultimate purpose of these abilities was to stack up to meet the requirements of advancing to some legendary professions. Just like the Dragon Disciple, if you didn't have the ability of a warlock, you would never be able to advance. Soren didn't finish the deduction of the Shadow Dancer's advancement until dawn. He looked at the dense symbols and murmured, "The Shadow Dancer can advance to a Shadow Walker. It's enough for stealth, evasion, and shadow mastery. Basically, I don't need to spend extra time training my abilities, but I seem to be missing 2 or 3 abilities. Then there's the advancement to a Shadow Lord. There's still a big gap." Soren hit his forehead hard and drove the complicated calculations out of his head. He then walked to the window and took a deep breath. No matter how much he advanced, he couldn't reach the most basic requirements for Shadow Dominator. 450 points in Sneak, 300 points in Dodge, 300 points in Literacy, Plain, 150 points in Detect, 150 points in Search, 150 points in Spell Identification. Shadow Dominator, Talent, Shadow Jump, Legendary, Interdimensional Teleportation, Shadow, Shadow Domain, Legendary, 30 points in Dexterity, 25 points in Wisdom, and so on. It's useless. Soren put away the paper on the table and murmured, "No matter how I stack up my advancement, it's useless. In the end, there's still a big gap." The second advancement was a legendary profession. The Shadow Lord belonged to the third advancement, and its abilities were on the same level as the gods. No matter how hard he tried to recall, he couldn't find a way to advance as soon as possible. Most of the abilities required him to spend a long time to train and master, and this time could be as long as 10 or even dozens of years. Without divinity, unless I'm also a son of God, my attributes won't reach the required level. Soren sighed and tore the paper into pieces. Then a little flame appeared on his fingertips, and soon all the statistics were burned to ashes. He sat down again, picked up the pen and made a few strokes, connecting many complicated symbols and words together. He said to himself, if I can't advance to a Shadow Lord, then I can only look at what's in front of me. Assassin. Shadow Dancer. Bounty Hunter. Soren drew 3 symbols on the paper and then listed the symbols of warrior, ranger, wizard, warlock, priest and so on. He closed his eyes and thought for a long time, trying to deduce the combat abilities of each profession in his memory. This kind of feeling was a bit like a scientist deducing engineering methods in his mind, or a simulation of a tactical sand table in his mind. After a long time he slowly opened his eyes and said, it seems that the Shadow Dancer's ability to deal with enemies is the strongest. No matter what profession the enemy is, there's no obvious shortcoming. So, should I advance to a Shadow Dancer? Then find a way to advance to a Shadow Walker? The time of troubles. Damn it. How can mortals fight against the gods and saints who came to the mortal world without absolute talent? Now that there's no one to kill them, how can so many gods fight? If only I had the talent of a warlock, I could advance to a dragon disciple first, and then find the card of fate to advance to a destiny warlock. No matter what gods I encounter in the future, I can't not fight back at all. There was an insurmountable gap between the gods and mortals. Soren calculated for a whole night. The only advanced profession he knew that could fight against the gods was the Shadow Master. No matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not meet the basic conditions for advancement. The dragons had begun to appear. The legendary professions also appeared one after another. It would not be long before the Son of God and the demigod appeared. No one knew the pressure in his heart. Escape could only be temporary. Even if he escaped to the Frost Kingdom with Vivian, sooner or later he would still have to face these high and mighty gods. Not to mention that Vivian might also be the son of fear. Dang dang dang. There was a soft knock on the door under the morning sun. The knocking position was very low. When Soren opened the door, he was not surprised to see the little Vivian. She was holding a large tray with oatmeal and snacks on it. Because of her small size, she had a hard time holding it. But when Soren opened the door, she immediately raised her little head and smiled. Brother. I've brought you breakfast. Soren reached out and took the tray, picked up the little Vivian and kissed her pink and tender cheek. At this moment, he made the worst decision in his heart. If there was really no other way, he would give up his life and advance to a Shadow Lich. Chapter 113. It was a simple and heartwarming breakfast. When Soren brought little Vivian downstairs, Gloria also happened to come out at the same time. She glanced at the little girl next to her, and her lips moved slightly but no sound came out. Only a sentence rang in Soren's ears. Vivian had a nightmare last night again. Soren nodded silently and his face was dignified, but he did not speak. This was already the 3rd time. As time passed, the signs that Vivian was the child of God became more and more obvious. The frequency of her nightmares also increased, and the interval between the last 2 nightmares was even shorter. Although the little girl often smiled and did not say anything, Soren knew that she must have guessed something. Vivian had been very smart since she was a child. Although she did not like to show it, she was definitely not a simple and obedient little girl. Most of the time she was smarter and sharper than Soren, but it was not obvious because of her age. After all, she was only 8 years old this year. When they went downstairs, the halfling's figure had just come in from outside the door. There were obvious wet marks on his feet, and it seemed that he had been outside. Aladdin quietly walked to Soren's side, found a stool and sat down. Then he whispered, "Last night the elven patrol was attacked. It seemed that it was done by war-creatures who believed in the god of the hunt, but I couldn't find out what kind of war-creatures did it. The elven patrol was very angry, and it seemed that they were going to contact the other patrol teams." War-creatures. They mainly referred to humanoid creatures such as gnolls, taurens, lion-faced people, centaurs, tiger-headed monsters, half-shepherds, harpies, sirens and so on. These creatures had some obvious human characteristics, and some obvious beast characteristics. It was said that they were the product of some taboo experiments during the Arcane Empire. Some of them were ancient life forms that had existed for a long time, and most of them were scattered around the world. There was also an intelligent life form, the orcs. They were the same kind of life form as humans, but they were not a type of war creatures. Malur, the god of the hunt? Soren frowned and paused for a moment before asking in a low voice, "Are you sure it was its followers that attacked the elves?" Aladdin nodded with certainty. "I'm very sure. Looks like trouble." Soren raised his head and looked at Gloria. Suddenly, he said to the halfling beside him, "We're going to leave soon. Do you want to continue traveling with us, or do you have other plans?" "Leaving so suddenly?" The halfling looked at Soren with some astonishment. Gloria, who was next to him, also raised her head in surprise. Aladdin was still puzzled, but the Northern Witch took a deep look at Soren and nodded gently, "Yes. We'll continue our journey to the Frost Kingdom." Many gods were not human or human-like creatures. Some were purely intelligent beasts. The god of the hunt, Malur, was such a god. He was a rare monster that became a god for some reason. His followers were mainly evil war creatures, hunters who enjoyed hunting, people who liked blood, and some fallen rangers like Droll. This was the easiest god to awaken. He had a strong desire for legendary blood. As long as the target was legendary or above, it was possible to attract his avatar. There were many war creature groups nearby that believed in the god of the hunt. Soren estimated that there was at least a 50% chance that the war creatures were holding some kind of ritual. In the legendary blood hunting ritual, the war creatures would also hunt a large number of ordinary creatures to pave the way. Malur was a very strange god. He liked to hunt powerful targets. The more powerful the prey, the easier it was to attract his attention. If it was just killing ordinary creatures, he would not even care at all. This kind of legendary hunting ritual could strengthen his divine power. In order to please this evil god, his followers would try to hunt legendary targets every once in a while. At first it was wild beasts. Later, even intelligent creatures were included in the list. The Northern Witch took a deep look into the distance and said in a low voice, "There's a red copper dragon nearby. Could it be that it's the target?" Legendary creatures. Dragons were undoubtedly the most standard legendary creatures. Soren also thought for a moment. He looked at the other party and said, "It's not that easy to kill a dragon. If it's not necessary, Malur's followers would not try to kill a dragon." Creatures of the chaotic evil alignment were more crazy. Malur's followers were some very crazy guys. Soren could not determine their goal and did not want to have too much interaction with them. In the dense virgin forest, a dark knoll was leaping between the trees. It was different from the knoll Soren had seen before. This knoll was more agile and more dangerous. Its pupils were green, and its figure was like a phantom shuttling through the forest. It often flew past in a flash, and it was difficult to catch its trace with the naked eye. It was wearing some kind of leather armor sewn from the skin of some kind of black beast. There were no weapons on its body, but at the position of its claws, one could see the cold light of steel. Its claws were actually replaced with metal by some kind of special method. Patter. The knoll, whose level could not be determined, landed. It looked to the side with its green eyes and said in a deep voice, "The ritual is about to begin. We must awaken the attention of the god of the hunt. Without the protection of the gods, the tribe will become weaker and weaker, and our prey will become fewer and fewer." Heavy footsteps were heard. It was a mixed-blood orc with a very strong physique that looked like a little giant. Its face was ferocious and its fangs were exposed. It glanced at the knoll in front of it and said, "The ritual requires legendary-level prey. I know there is a red copper dragon nearby, but it seems that we can't kill it with our strength." The knoll showed a grim smile. There was a metal tooth on its right side. It said, "There is no need to kill the dragon. I know there is a son of fear nearby. The blood of these sons of fear will definitely attract the attention of the Lord more than the dragon." Son of fear? The mixed-blood orc looked around. There were many strange creatures around it. The followers of the god of the hunt were very complicated. There were humans, orcs, and even intelligent beasts as well as dark creatures that enjoyed hunting. The black gnoll looked at the others and said in a deep voice, "I have seen him use his divine power. It seems that he has just awakened. Some of you go and prepare other sacrifices. The rest of you follow me to track the prey. I believe that using a son of fear as a sacrifice will definitely awaken Malur's attention." Strong figures flew out. These hunters, whose strength was conservative and above grade 3, spread out. Accompanied by all kinds of strange howls, they quickly scattered into the dense forest. The gnoll raised its metal claws and scratched its face with the sharp claws. Drops of blood dripped down the side of its face. The other creatures that stayed behind did the same. The strong mixed blood orc cut its forehead with a blade, then knelt down on one knee and began to pray. There was a devout and crazy smile on its face. The hunting ritual. At this moment it really began. Chapter 114. They were next to a clean rock. Soren was sitting next to them chewing on dried meat. Gloria didn't seem to have a good appetite, so she only ate a little and put it down. The northern witches were of noble birth, so they didn't like this kind of inferior food. She would only eat some snacks and drink some water in the wild. Vivian wasn't picky at all. Whether it was a delicious meal or a tasteless dry food, the little girl could eat it with relish. She even raised her little white hand to wipe Soren's mouth. "Who is it?" Soren's hand that was holding the dry food suddenly paused. He jumped up in an instant, pulled out his curved sword and shouted towards the distant woods, "Who is it? Come out quickly. Otherwise don't blame me for being rude." Gloria also reacted very quickly. She instantly took out a staff from her multi-dimensional bag, and the gems that stored spells on it slightly glowed. Vivian's small body stood behind Soren, and there seemed to be some doubt on her face. She looked up at the woods not far away, and her expression was difficult to describe with words. She also seemed to be a little confused. "Sorry." A magnetic voice sounded, and then a very handsome elven ranger came out. He was so eye-catching just by standing there. If Soren's appearance with a trace of half-elf blood was relatively handsome, then compared to the elven ranger in front of them, he was even worse than an ordinary person. With just a glance, both men and women would be affected by his handsome appearance for a while. He was like the protagonist of a story in a tavern. Even if it was just a glance, he could make noble ladies blush and their hearts beat faster. This was an extremely handsome elven ranger. Even Soren couldn't describe his handsome appearance with words. He could only say that he was favored by the elven gods. Gloria's eyes lit up for a moment, and then she slightly frowned. The northern witches still retained the characteristics of the northerners. They appreciated the strong with perseverance. The elven ranger in front of them was too handsome, so handsome that it felt a little surreal. The elven ranger landed lightly on the ground and jumped down from the tree. He glanced at Soren's face, then glanced at Gloria and finally stopped at Vivian who was behind her. He said, "I don't mean any harm. I'm just passing by." Soren didn't relax at all. He said in a deep voice, "Then please leave." The elven ranger did not leave immediately. He smiled and looked very friendly. He took a step forward and said, "Don't be so nervous. I'm a ranger who believes in the god of nature." "Stop." Soren's expression was still serious as he said in a low voice, "We don't know you, please leave this place." The elven ranger's stiff eyebrows slightly wrinkled. He glanced at Soren, then turned his eyes to Gloria. He showed a charming smile and slowly said, "Dear lady, your companion doesn't seem to be very friendly to me. I think he may have misunderstood me. I just happened to pass by. It's very dangerous to travel alone in the wilderness. Maybe we can travel together." "Where are you going?" Gloria gently lifted her long hair. The veil on her face prevented him from seeing her expression. He only heard her slowly say, "Back off, stranger." At this moment, Vivian suddenly pulled Soren's clothes with her small hand and whispered, "Brother, this person looks very familiar, but I don't think I've seen him before." The little girl had a very good memory. She could remember most of the people she met. The elven ranger in front of her had very good hearing. He seemed to have heard Vivian's words. He grabbed his head and showed a kind smile, then said softly, "Hello, lovely little girl. You also give me a familiar feeling. Maybe we've met before." Soren and Gloria looked at each other in an instant, and the alert look on their faces became more dignified. Although the elven ranger in front of them looked very handsome and had a harmless smile, the two of them didn't feel that he was friendly at all. When they first met the halfling, Aladdin was standing on the side of the road. When he saw them, he even jumped up and waved at them. At a glance, they knew that he didn't have any hostility. But the elven ranger in front of them was different. He had obviously snuck up on them. He only showed himself when Soren noticed him. His seemingly friendly smile was probably just a disguise. His acting skills must be very good. The elven ranger didn't seem to think that he would encounter such a situation. With his incomparably handsome appearance and friendly smile, he rarely attracted any hostility from others. However, the two people in front of him looked like they were ready to fight at any time. No matter how handsome or friendly his smile was, it couldn't change the other party's attitude. If he had directly walked over, Soren wouldn't be so hostile. However, the Elven Ranger was quietly hiding nearby and only showed up after being discovered. This was very strange. Vivian gently wrinkled her nose and whispered, "Brother, let him go." The three of them didn't like him very much. The Elven Ranger's expression was a little stiff, but he still forced a smile and then retreated into the forest. When he turned around, his face instantly became gloomy. He did pass by because he accidentally discovered them. He seemed to have sensed something and approached them. At first, he just wanted to observe them quietly. However, he didn't expect to be discovered by Soren as soon as he sneaked over. This was a very powerful rogue. The Elven Ranger's stealth ability was also very strong. The fact that he was discovered in an instant only proved that the other party was much more experienced in stealth than him. He didn't know how Soren discovered him, but to be able to discover him, he was definitely a first-class rogue. Soren held his curved sword tightly. After making sure that the Elven Ranger had really left, he nodded and said in a deep voice, "Let's move on. There was something wrong with that Elven Ranger just now." Gloria looked into the distance and immediately cast Lighten. Soren carried Vivian on his back, and the three of them continued to move forward. Those who were proficient in stealth would naturally be able to discover signs of stealth. In order to hide from Soren's perception, one would need at least 150 points in stealth. Although the Elven Ranger was also proficient in stealth, he couldn't be compared to a professional rogue. If it was the halfling Aladdin, Soren wouldn't be able to discover him so easily. This was the territory of the elves. It was normal to encounter Elven Rangers here. Soren carried Vivian on his back and continued to move forward. Gloria seemed to have something on her mind along the way, and she would look back from time to time. "What's wrong?" Soren noticed her abnormality and asked, "Is there something wrong?" Gloria was silent for a moment. Then her lips moved slightly and she used a level 0 communication spell and said, "That Elven Ranger just now looked a little like Vivian. He also seemed to have something different about him. And he was too handsome, he didn't look like an elf at all." These were the words that entered Soren's ears, but her voice was, "Nothing. I just wanted to see if that Elven Ranger was following us." Elves were very handsome. But the Elven Ranger just now was not only handsome, his appearance could even affect the attitude of others. It was like some creatures with the talent of charm. If you approached them, you would have to go through a test of will. Otherwise, you would be affected. Soren was about to say something, but suddenly there was a dull roar behind him. It sounded a little like the roar of an orc, which had a unique wild nature. Soren swallowed the words he wanted to say and prepared for battle in an instant. Gloria also cast a defensive spell with a dignified expression, and then pulled Vivian behind her. Whoa! The howl of the gnolls was heard, and it was like a sign, and all kinds of howls could be heard from all directions. These sounds were very mixed, and Soren even heard the low roar of a cheetah. The sound was not far from where they were, and they could vaguely hear the roar of battle, and all kinds of howls that were gradually approaching. Not good. Soren's expression changed slightly, and he pulled Gloria up and said, "It seems to be a believer of the god of hunting, let's go." Chapter 115. Howls and howls could be heard. A figure could be seen leaping through the trees in the distance, followed by a few other dark figures. The roars of the beastmen were getting closer and closer. Soren carried Vivian on his back and prepared to retreat. Gloria also quickly cast a spell, but the monsters in all directions seemed to have noticed them. They could vaguely see a few strong figures jumping down from the trees, planning to go around and block them. One of the figures was very eye-catching. It was a large black cheetah, a mutated beast. Some special beasts had mutated genes, possibly related to the forbidden experiments of the Arcane Empire. They had appeared in large numbers for a period of time, but many of them were hunted down and killed. The remaining ones escaped to the astral plane and the outer realms. Some of the beasts in the material plane had inherited these mutated genes. When a creature's level reached a certain level, it was possible for them to mutate. These beasts had spell-like abilities, but they were very rare. Most of them only had high intelligence and powerful hunting abilities. These beasts were said to be the failed products of the war-creature experiment. Soren stopped and handed Vivian to Gloria. The black cheetah in front of them was very difficult to deal with. Its body was almost the size of a Siberian tiger, and its elegant body had obvious muscle contours. It was like a bodybuilding champion among beasts. This meant that the cheetah was very strong. It was even stronger than a brown bear, and its claws could tear through armor. The cheetah's speed was very scary. Soren didn't dare to continue running, because it would be exposing his back to the cheetah. In short-distance sprinting, almost no creature could surpass this mutated cheetah. In the wilderness, cheetahs were more dangerous than tigers because it was basically impossible to outrun them on land. Against such creatures, if you tried to run away, they would only pounce on you in an instant, and then mercilessly tear your throat out. Soren took a deep breath as he sprinted. His muscles tensed and he jumped 10 meters or so. He swung his curved sword and slashed at the cheetah's head. The beast had no protection, and its hide alone couldn't stop his attack. It was a light leap. The large black panther nimbly dodged his attack. At the same time, its face revealed an anthropomorphic mocking smile. This beast's intelligence was higher than expected. Its creature level might have reached grade 3 or above. But it was still too careless. Soren raised his finger and shot out 2 arcane missiles from his fingertips within a second. No matter how fast the panther was, there was no way it could dodge the attack at such a close distance. The next moment, a small hole was opened in its neck. The 2 arcane missiles had pierced through its skin, leaving a wound about 3 centimeters deep. Blood immediately splashed out. With Soren's spell power, the 2 arcane missiles at such close range dealt at least 20 damage. 1 point of spell power could increase the damage of the arcane missiles by 1 point. A high-grade wizard could easily pierce through armor with arcane missiles. Soren's spell power was also around 10 points. Even if he didn't use vitality, he could still inflict light damage to the target. The wounded cheetah was obviously a bit slow. Soren quickly followed up with a swing of his curved sword, and blood splashed out as he slashed at the cheetah's back. The slash left a wound about 5 centimeters deep. But after breaking through the muscles, he couldn't continue. He could only withdraw his sword and retreat. His vitality reduced the damage taken. 2 points of vitality increased damage reduction by 1 point. Some creatures with strong vitality could even use their muscles to clamp down on weapons. Dragons were the best of the best. Without extraordinary weapons, it would be very difficult to kill a dragon subspecies. Even if one could break its dragon skin, they would not be able to break through its tough muscles, and they would not be able to damage its vital organs. Therefore, it would be very difficult to kill a dragon subspecies with just bleeding damage. Sharp claws slashed through the air. The thick and tough cheetah's tail whipped at Soren, and the wind whistled like a whip. Soren twisted his body to avoid the attack. 3 shallow scratches were left on his arm, and his waist was hit by the tail. But with his vitality he could still withstand it. The other monsters nearby were getting closer and closer. Soren didn't have time to waste. He instantly took out his wooden cane and pointed it at the cheetah in front of him. A flash of light appeared. The weeds on the ground suddenly grew wildly, and they wrapped around the cheetah like tenacious vines. Even if the cheetah had the strength of a large cat, it couldn't break free in a short time. This short 1 or 2 seconds was more than enough for Soren. He jumped onto the cheetah's back and used his strength to push it down. Then he held his curved sword tightly with both hands and slashed down. The power of sword form. Heavy hack exploded in an instant, and the curved sword cut off the cheetah's head. Blood spurted out 3 to 5 meters away. The headless body of the cheetah stiffened for a moment, and then fell to the ground with a thud. A row of data appeared: activated sword form, heavy hack. Activated decapitation. Dealt 125 decapitation damage to the target. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've received 2450 slaughter EXP. It was indeed a grade 3 cheetah. The creature's level was estimated to be around level 12. If it wasn't for the surprise attack, it would be more difficult to deal with it than dealing with the earth elementals. Big brother, be careful. Suddenly Vivian's scream came from behind Soren. Gloria also quickly cast a spell in an instant. First, she buffed them with a spell, then raised her hand and shot a blood-red light in front of them. Finger of Death. The sound of the bowstring vibrating could be heard. Soren didn't think much and activated the elemental stone on his body. A yellowish mark on the ground spread to his body. Almost at the same time as the stone skin spell was cast on his body, a sharp arrow flew over and hit him directly in the chest. The force of the arrow caused him to take a step back. Next to the bushes in front of him, a tall and burly orc with a strong bow in his hand locked onto Soren with a ferocious gaze. But in the next moment, its gaze turned into shock. Soren did not fall. The arrow hit his chest, but it was only stuck between his ribs. The arrow should have pierced him directly, but it was offset by stone skin, which reduced the damage by 20 points. In addition, Soren had 20 points of constitution, so although the arrow hit his chest, it did not cause as much damage as expected. He gritted his teeth and pulled out the arrow. The leather armor in front of his chest was pierced. The opponent used a strong bow. The dark red light hit the tall and burly orc in the next moment. Its body stiffened and then it fell straight to the ground. Level 7 spell, Finger of Death. The Finger of Death cast by a high-grade northern, which was not a joke. It was not easy for any profession below grade 4 to pass the test of death. If they couldn't pass the test of death, they would die in an instant. After pulling out the arrow, Soren didn't care about the wound. He swung his sword to block the attack of another mixed-blood orc next to him. The heavy battle axe with ferocious force made his whole body sink. A gnoll mixed-blood creature on the left threw out a short axe and hit Soren's back in the next moment. Clang. The short axe seemed to have hit solid marble. Soren's leather armor was only dented a little, and he almost didn't suffer any damage. The opponent's strength wasn't high, and they probably didn't have special training in throwing weapons. The attack of the short axe didn't exceed 20 points, and it couldn't break through Soren's stone skin. The presence of the northern which attracted most of the hunters' attention. At least more than half of the hunters bypassed Soren and rushed to Gloria and Vivian behind him. Wizards were the most terrifying existences. They must not be given the chance to cast spells. A monster with a ferocious face that even Soren couldn't recognize roared, and its body suddenly began to grow. It then took a deep breath and sprinted on the ground with all 4 limbs. The speed was almost unbelievable. It was a berserk orc. In the face of such a dangerous situation, Gloria was still as calm as ever. She even had the time to pull Vivian behind her. Then she abruptly pulled out her magic staff and pointed it forward. A fireball the size of a wash basin flew out. Its target wasn't the enemy in front of her, but the empty space in front of her. 1 second ago, the sprinting monster didn't have time to stop. It was completely inertia. When it rushed over, it just happened to enter the core area of the fireball's explosion. The next second, its whole body was covered in blood and flesh. Its chest was blown to the bone and its hair was burning. Vivian looked carefully. Gloria had an awe-inspiring aura. She was completely different from the one Soren knew. She said in a cold voice, "Do you still remember the movement calculation I taught you? Movement positioning and spell prediction are very important skills. Many enemies are very fast and spells don't have to be aimed at the enemy to be effective." The whistling sound of the wind was heard. 2 flying axes and a long sword were thrown towards the 2 of them. Gloria didn't care at all. She slammed her wand into the ground, and then her hands quickly cast a spell. At the same time she said, "Spell protection field is the foundation of a spellcaster. When fighting, you have to make sure that you are covered by the energy protection field at all times." Bang bang bang. The thrown weapons seemed to hit the invisible air, and when they hit the energy protection field they made a muffled sound. Gloria's expression didn't change at all. It seemed that she didn't see the enemies rushing over at all. Focus was the most important basic skill for a spellcaster in a battle. A spellcaster couldn't be distracted and let the enemy interrupt their spellcasting. The skill of focus also made them more sensitive to the changes around them. Shadow tentacles. 6 energy tentacles broke out of the ground and shot out in an instant. Half of the enemies nearby were instantly stunned, and then they were rolled up and hung upside down by the energy tentacles. The shadow tentacles cast by the high-grade witches were completely different from Soren's. The energy tentacles wrapped up and directly strangled 2 enemies, and then all the nearby enemies were dragged back and hung in the air. Only then did Gloria slowly pull out her staff and say in a serious voice, "Vivian, you have to always remember that for a wizard, control is more important than damage." The battlefield was strangely silent for a moment. Everyone, including Soren, also saw the real strength of a high-grade northern witch at this moment. This was the style of a high-grade wizard. Chapter 116. Soren didn't hesitate at all. When the dark tentacles entangled the enemies near Gloria, he quickly pulled out his scimitar and retreated. The scimitar drew a cold light and beheaded the enemies that were entangled by the dark tentacles. Wizards would never be the main damage output. They could only remember a small number of large-scale destructive spells. Even the real damage spells were only single-target fatal spells like Finger of Death. In a battle, the melee professions were always responsible for the last hit. It was better to control the enemy and let the warrior slash them with his scimitar instead of dealing damage. More and more enemies appeared in the vicinity. The number of enemies was completely beyond Soren's estimation. Even Gloria's expression became dignified. She said in a deep voice, My spell slots can't deal with so many enemies. The number of enemies was more than 100. All of them were creatures above grade 2. They were believers of the god of hunting and were much stronger than the guards of Whiterun. The believers of the gods must have stronger fighting abilities. If the god of hunting hadn't fallen into a deep sleep, perhaps there would have been existences among these monsters that could use divine spells. The power of the weak gods was not enough. They were weakened a lot before the time of troubles. They would only grant divine spells to their core believers and priests. Other believers who were not valued would lose the ability to use divine spells. These monsters held hunting rituals to awaken the gods' attention. As long as they proved their value, the god of hunting might regard them as more useful believers and grant them divine spells. Those worthless believers would be deprived of their divine spells because the power of the god of hunting was also declining. The time of troubles. All the gods' divinity level was declining. When their divinity level was exhausted, they would fall to the mortal world. The weaker the gods, the faster they would fall. Only when the energy storm of the time of troubles was over would they regain their divinity level and return to the kingdom of the gods. The gods who walked in the mortal world were saints. They didn't have divinity levels. They only retained their initial profession level, so some of them were very weak. Some of them relied on luck to ascend to godhood. Their own strength was not very strong. They were only around the high-grade legendary level. They relied on their divinity level to break through to a total level of more than 40. This was why there had been cases of weaker deities killing stronger deities. The reason for this was that after losing their divine cores, the difference in strength between the two parties would not be too great. However, when the gods descended to the mortal world as saints, their average attributes were basically above 25 points. Even without the power brought by the level of divinity, the difference in their attributes could completely crush any mortal. A small number of powerful deities could reach up to 50 points in their attributes. When faced with the goddess of magic who had 50 points of intelligence, even legendary wizards would feel that their spells were like sideshows. Among the abyssal demon gods, they were known for their strength. It was no joke for them to be able to move mountains and fill seas with their bare hands. There were more and more believers of the god of hunting. Soren realized the severity of the situation. Gloria's spell slots could not handle so many enemies. Just as he was about to cover Gloria's escape, a loud howl came from behind. Then the elven ranger rushed out. He looked very embarrassed. There were 7 or 8 bloodstains on his body. His handsome face was torn by sharp claws. He was almost completely disfigured. He was holding a long sword in his hand, and the way he held the sword was very strange. Upon closer inspection, one of his fingers was broken. It seemed that his little finger was bitten off by some beast. When the elven ranger saw Soren and the others, his eyes immediately showed a look of surprise. Then his expression became vicious. He suddenly leaped and left the hunters behind him, who were obviously much stronger. At the same time, he quickly approached them. It turned out that he was the target of the believers of the god of hunting. Behind him, there were obviously more powerful hunters and trackers. A group of monsters gave up on Soren and the others and rushed toward the elven ranger in front of them. This was the most important goal. They must not let the elven ranger in front of them escape. Otherwise, this hunting ritual would be considered a failure. Death's fear. The elven ranger did not make any casting movements, not even a spell. He raised his hand and a light appeared. Then a wave of fear aura exploded among the enemies blocking the way. This was not a divine spell that could be used by high-grade rangers, nor was it an arcane spell cast by wizards. It was a special spell-like ability. It might be a talent that the elven ranger had. A large number of creatures froze in place. Then many of them showed fear on their faces as if something terrible was happening. They fled in panic in all directions. There were even a small number of enemies who turned blue and died on the spot. They were scared to death. The elven ranger scattered the enemies in front of him with fear. Then he suddenly sped up and rushed over, getting closer and closer to Soren. Damn it. Soren's expression was very ugly for a moment. Gloria next to him also looked dignified. Because just a spell-like attack, they were sure of the identity of the elven ranger in front of them. Son of Fear. Other than the son of the Dread Lord, they really could not think of anyone else who could cast fear at will and achieve the effect of scaring the enemy to death. A gnoll whose whole body was dark like a shadow appeared. It stretched out its scarlet tongue and licked the corner of its mouth. Its metal claws flashed a cold light. It grinned and said, "The flesh of the son of Fear is really extraordinary." I felt an exuberant life force. Maybe after the ritual is completed and we kill him, we can have a good meal ourselves. The majestic hybrid orc strode out of the forest, carrying a giant battle axe that weighed nearly 200 pounds in its hand. It roared, "He is the prey for my lord. After the ritual is completed, we can decide what to do with his body." Soren clenched his curved sword and stared fiercely at the elven ranger who was getting closer and closer. The elven ranger's purpose was very vicious. He actually intended to lead these hunters to them. Soren's murderous intent was very strong. He said, "When he gets close, you find a way to control him. I'll be responsible for killing him." Gloria nodded gently. Her eyes were also full of murderous intent. Killing this guy might make the hunters stop attacking. Even if the possibility was not high, it was worth a try. Besides, this guy was definitely not running towards them with good intentions. The elven ranger was getting closer and closer, but stopped before entering the range of Gloria's spell. He jumped to a high place and then shouted to the believers in all directions, "I'm not the only son of fear. The little girl over there is also a son of fear." "I don't believe it. Look over there." He seemed to have activated some special ability. He raised his hand and pointed in the direction of Soren. A wave of fear aura burst out. Many terrible scenes appeared in Soren's mind. There were mountains of corpses, seas of blood, and piles of bones. There were also all kinds of cruel and horrible scenes. However, how could his will be so easily shaken? It only took a moment for him to suppress this feeling of fear. At the same time, a series of data flashed in front of his eyes. "You are affected by fear aura. Test of will triggered. Successfully passed, death fright. Successfully resisted the effect of fear." Gloria's will was obviously very high. She was only a little startled and quickly recovered. But what everyone did not expect was, Vivian, who was standing behind Gloria, suddenly trembled all over. Then her eyes suddenly widened and her cute little face was pale. Her face seemed to be slightly blue because of fear, as if she was trying to suppress something. When her emotions accumulated to a certain limit, she suddenly let out a very sharp scream. "Ah!" An invisible sound wave spread, and the first to bear the brunt was Soren. His ears were buzzing and traces of blood were oozing out from his eyes, ears, mouth and nose. Then there was Gloria, who was standing next to him. Her face was very pale, as if some kind of spell had been activated. Suddenly, a flash of light protected her in it. Her figure swayed and almost fell to the ground. The terrible sound wave spread out. The nearby Mailer believers fell in batches like wheat being cut down. At least half of them died directly under the sound wave. All the others were bleeding from their 7 orifices, and their figures were obviously shaking. The only ones who were not affected much were the powerful hunters. They were grade 4 professions. This level of attack could only hurt them, but it was not fatal. The elven ranger showed a vicious smile on his face and said, "Did you see that? She is also a child of fear. It seems that the 2 people around her are a little weak. The children of fear that have just awakened are very weak. Why don't you kill them first? It should be easier to kill them than to kill me, right?" The dark gnoll showed a sneer. After glancing at the prey in front of him, he said with a ferocious expression, "I like your vicious heart. But if we offer 2 children of fear as sacrifices, we will definitely be rewarded by our Lord." An invisible sound wave spread rapidly, and all the beasts within a 5-kilometer radius seemed to be greatly frightened, and all of them frantically fled in all directions. In an ancient cave, a droll who was meditating with his eyes closed suddenly opened his eyes. He slowly stood up. As an elf, he was unusually tall and strong like a solid rock. He walked out of the cave with heavy steps, looked at the chaotic forest in the distance and murmured, "Who scared them?" An eagle fell from the sky. After it landed, it turned into the figure of a droll. It humbly lowered its head and said, "Your Excellency Earthwalker." Farther away, somewhere in a dark underground secret room, the black-robed priest on the altar suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were shining and he said fanatically, "The first child of fear has awakened. Let the hand of despair go. Find him at all costs." Time froze at this moment. Soren's eyes suddenly became bloodshot. That was because the burst of power in his body made his blood surge. His heart accelerated to the limit in an instant. His kidneys secreted crazily, and the excessive congestion turned his pupils into a blood-red color. His face was a little distorted, and his expression was very ferocious. His originally injured body began to gradually recover. As a large amount of slaughter EXP was consumed, his injuries became lighter and lighter. His figure also became more and more blurred, as if he was about to disappear in the shadows. Behind him, Soren's shadow was distorted. The next moment, he rushed toward the elven ranger in front of him, and his figure disappeared out of thin air. The entire material plane also completely lost track of him in this second. Shadow plane travel. P.S. This chapter was written very slowly. It took me a long time to edit it, so the update is half an hour late. 2 updates today, more updates tomorrow. Chapter 117. Everything happened in 1 second. When Soren's figure disappeared into thin air, everything in front of him turned gray. The sky was an eternal gray, even the sunlight and the moonlight were the same color. This 1 second was very short, and Soren's surroundings were rapidly moving backward. His body was assimilated by the shadows in a short period of time and temporarily transformed into the form of a shadow creature. The physical body became illusory. The surrounding scenery was also distorted. Plane travel opened a dimensional passage to the shadow plane, which was a spell-like teleportation ability. It could only be used for a few seconds and it didn't really enter the shadow plane. The next moment he appeared behind the elven ranger. The elven ranger's shadow twisted strangely. The ferocious shadow turned into a distorted outline, and finally turned into Soren's shadow. Then, a vague figure covered by shadows suddenly appeared. The elven ranger still had a vicious smile on his face. Anyway, he had achieved his goal. The hunters had obviously assigned some of their manpower to deal with Soren and Gloria. This way he would be in less danger. As long as the hunters were restrained by the 3 people next to him, he would have a great chance to escape with his ability. After all, he was also a son of fear. He even began to plan his escape route. He didn't even have time to change the expression on his face. Just like that, his body suddenly stiffened. The sharp tip of the blade pierced through his chest and pierced his heart in an instant. Then, with a loud shout, the blade twisted violently. Die. Soren's expression was ferocious. He held the blade with both hands and twisted it. The blade broke through the elven ranger's armor and pierced through his heart. At the same time, it twisted a bloody hole in his chest. A crack appeared on the exquisite military-grade curved sword. This weapon couldn't withstand Soren's sudden burst of strength and showed signs of cracking. The shadow behind him was still twisting. The elven ranger's shadow overlapped with his own. His whole person looked gray like a black shadow. When he pulled out the curved sword, the shadow returned to its original appearance, and the blurry face gradually became clear. The elven ranger's body fell straight to the ground. In a situation that no one expected, he was directly killed by Soren. The gnoll's ferocious smile remained stiffly on his face. The other hunters were in disbelief. A bunch of data crazily appeared. Activate dark vision. Activate shadow hide. Activate shadow jump. Activate shadow strike. Shadow hide successful. Ability, evade sight, activated. Shadow jump successful. Activate cross-plane shadow jump ability. Shadow strike successful. You received 9 points of shadow damage. Activated backstab. You have dealt 121 points of fatal damage. Target killed. Extracted soul energy of the soul. You have gained 3,600 slaughter EXP. Target is a divine creature. Divine power extracted divine power. Received 3 divinity. Of the target of the target. Failed. Divinity storage. Clergy storage of the divinity. You don't have any divine spark or divine domain to store the divine power of fear. Target of the target. Behind the dense jumping data were the data that appeared in the second when Soren exploded. Thief profession has leveled up to level 7. Received 25, DX 20 plus, INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5, skill points, HP increased by 11, profession HP 6 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. The 11 HP brought about by leveling up temporarily alleviated his injuries. Although his ears were still temporarily deaf, Soren had regained his perception of the outside world. The anger and killing intent in his heart were extremely strong. He did not hesitate to put the slaughter EXP into it. The elven ranger in front of him must die. Such a strong killing intent even made his pupils become blood red because of the expansion of the tiny blood vessels. All the skill points were allocated to evade. Soren reached the requirements to advance into a shadow dancer in an instant, and then chose to advance without hesitation. Advance into a shadow dancer. Advancement requirements. Reflex evasion, achieved. Flexible movement, achieved. 100 points of sneak, achieved. 50 points of evade achieved. You have successfully advanced into a Shadow Dancer. Shadow Dancer's ability bonus activated. You have spent an additional 5,000 slaughter EXP. You have learned the profession talent, Evade Sight. Sneak plus 15, Evade plus 20. HP increased by 13, profession HP 8 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. You have gained a free attribute point. You have successfully advanced into a grade 3 profession. You have gained the opportunity to purify your bloodline. You have gained an additional ability point. Advancing into a Shadow Dancer cost him more than 13,000 slaughter EXP. In addition to the extra 5,000 slaughter EXP, he also needed to pay the soul energy to level up. However, the strength of the advanced profession was also undeniable. Soren lost a skill point allocation from the rogue level, but he gained an additional 10 points of sneak and 20 points of evade. At the same time, he also mastered the most useful ability of the Shadow Dancer, Evade Sight. Evade Sight, profession talent. The Shadow Dancer has extraordinary shadow skills. This skill is not comparable to other professions that use shadow abilities. As long as the body is in the shadows, the Shadow Dancer can use shadow energy to confuse the enemy's sight. Under any circumstances, the Shadow Dancer can activate the stealth skill, also in battle. Even if the Shadow Dancer is exposed to the enemy's eyes, the Shadow Dancer can let himself successfully escape into the shadows and disappear from the enemy's sight out of thin air. Level 1 is once a day. There was also a limit to the rogue's stealth ability. It was impossible to directly disappear from the enemy's sight. Stealth was a process of merging oneself into the shadows. This process involved the ubiquitous shadow energy. There were only two kinds of advanced rogues that could disappear in front of your eyes in broad daylight. One was the lurker who mastered Evade Sight, and the other was the Shadow Dancer who mastered Evade Sight. The former directly disappeared into the shadow plane, and the latter used shadow energy to confuse your sight. The lurker was no longer in the material plane in this second of escaping into the shadows. He would temporarily enter the shadow plane and then come back. When he came back, he would have been completely integrated into the shadow energy. The Shadow Dancer used shadow energy to confuse your sight in this second. Although you couldn't see his existence, the Shadow Dancer was still in front of you, and you could still attack him. The Shadow Dancer profession has been upgraded to level 2. Receive 25 DX 20 plus INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 13, profession HP 8 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Advanced profession talent comprehension. You have comprehended the profession talent, Dark Vision. The half-elf night vision ability has been superimposed. The total rogue profession level is 9, level 7 thief, level 2 Shadow Dancer. You have received an additional ability point. One rogue level increased his HP by 11 points, and 2 Shadow Dancer levels increased his HP by 26 points. As an advanced combat-type profession, the Shadow Dancer had a strong evasion ability, which could improve the efficiency of mastering evasion abilities. At the same time, the profession level was also 2 points higher than the rogue. The basic HP of the rogue was 6, and the basic HP of the Shadow Dancer was 8. It was the same as the basic HP of most agility-based warriors. Abilities had to be trained or obtained by relying on ability points, but profession talents were abilities that could be mastered directly. Talents, as the name implied, were innate abilities. Many talents were special abilities that did not require ability points to master. Talents were basically brought about by advanced professions and innate bloodlines. A total of 37 HP increase. Soren directly recovered a lot from his seriously injured state. His vision had been restored. Although his ears were still bleeding, he could gradually hear. His internal organs that were affected by some kind of supernatural sound wave power quickly recovered. His body that was seriously injured by Vivian's attack had completely recovered. His eyes locked on the Elven Ranger in front of him, and he did not hesitate to upgrade the Shadow Dancer to level 2. In the case of a secondary profession, the secondary profession only counted half of the profession level. Level 7 Thief, level 2 Advanced Shadow Dancer. Soren's rogue level was 9 in total. His secondary profession level 5 Wizard only counted half of the level bonus, so his total profession level was about 12. 3 profession levels could bring 1 ability point. When the total profession level was above 10 and entered grade 3, each advancement would also give an additional ability point. Soren directly gave up on upgrading other abilities including Danger Sense, Reflex Evasion Proficiency, Summon Shadow, and other powerful abilities. He put all his ability points into the Grasp of Shadows ability. Spend 1 ability point. Profession ability, Grasp of Shadows, upgraded to Shadow Manipulation. Spend 1 ability point. Profession ability, Shadow Manipulation, upgraded to Shadow Weaving. Prerequisite met. Sneak 150 achieved, Shadow Weaving achieved, Advanced Shadow Dancer achieved. You have mastered the advanced ability of the Shadow Dancer, Shadow Jump. Soren leveled up 3 times in a row. He gave up the combat skills of the Shadow Dancer, and also gave up the precious opportunity to directly master Danger Sense, and also gave up the additional spell-like ability of Summon Shadow. He almost gave up most of his core abilities in order to master Shadow Jump in advance. 1 slash. Soren used Shadow Jump to kill the Elven Ranger in front of him with 1 slash. Danger Sense, supernatural ability. Your perception will predict all attacks, whether it is a magic attack or a physical attack. Any attack against you will inevitably trigger a perception test. If you pass the perceptive sense test, you will be able to predict all attacks aimed at you in advance, including directional spells. You will gain additional perceptive sense ability to dodge all attacks. Note: this supernatural ability can be stacked with the supernatural talent of the super strong Sixth Sense. Shadow Jump, supernatural ability. You completely assimilate yourself into the shadows and transform into a shadow life form when activating Shadow Jump. In the state of Shadow Jump, any shadow within 100 meters can be used as a landing point for you to jump across planes. This supernatural ability is equivalent to a 100-meter blink teleportation spell. It can only be used when you are in stealth mode and in the shadows. This ability cannot be used to jump across planes to places without shadows. Note: this is the prerequisite ability of the legendary skill Shadow Step. It can only be used once per day. Chapter 118. He died just like that. Everyone present was a little sluggish, especially the hunters who had just chased the Elven Ranger for half a day. As one of the Sons of Fear, even without counting the ability brought by the divine power of fear, the Elven Ranger was still a grade 4 profession. A ranger with a profession level of 15 or above was not so easy to kill. In their view, Soren was at most a grade 3 rogue, and his profession level was not necessarily level 10. But the moment when he broke out was beyond everyone's imagination, especially the ability to suddenly appear in the opponent's shadow. It was definitely possible for a high-grade rogue to do that. This was the power of advanced professions, to give up part of the ability to pursue the limit of a certain ability. Soren's comprehensive strength was certainly not comparable to a high-grade rogue, but after advancing into a Shadow Dancer, his lethality could directly kill a high-grade enemy that was 5 levels higher. Assassins used poison, lurkers used Shadow Escape, and Shadow Dancers relied on Shadow Jump that they had mastered in advance. Soren was most proficient in Lurker. 1 second of Shadow Escape could allow him to avoid many fatal spells. He advanced into a Lurker largely because he encountered many enemies with powerful spells. As long as it was a spell that could not attack across planes, Lurkers could use Shadow Escape to avoid it. Among all advanced rogues, only Shadow Dancers had the lowest requirement to master, Shadow Jump. Even if Lurkers wanted to use Shadow Jump, they would need more than 200 points of sneak, but Lurkers could master the legendary ability, Shadow Realm, in advance. The level requirement for them to open the passage to the Shadow Plane was about 2 levels lower than other rogue professions. The time advanced to the 3rd second. Soren pulled out his curved sword and kicked the Elven Ranger's body down. Gloria had just recovered from her injuries, and her face was still very pale. The hunter's expressions changed from shock to anger because with the death of the Elven Ranger under Soren's sword, their ritual to the god of hunting had completely failed. The gnoll stared at him fiercely, and then his eyes fell on Vivian next to him. Since a Son of Fear had died, another could only replace it. Time continued to advance by 1 second. Vivian's small body was strangely suspended in the air. Her expression was very blank and her cute little face was pale. Suddenly, her brows furrowed tightly, and her expression became somewhat pained. The Elf Ranger was dead. Soren had absorbed all of his divinity, which gave him 3 divinity points in advance. However, Soren had no way of absorbing the divine power of fear that the Dread Lord had bestowed upon the Son of God. The power of the gods had great limitations. This was a power that was beyond the control of mortals. If one didn't have a divinity or a corresponding domain of divinity, then no one would be able to obtain this divine power. This was because it would reject one's body and in the end it could directly kill one. Soren was not the son of fear. He couldn't absorb the power that the Dread Lord left in his son's body, but this power wouldn't disappear into thin air. At the moment of the Elven Ranger's death, this power of fear began to shift, and its target was naturally Vivian, who had just awakened. The little girl showed a pained expression. She held her head with her small hands, and her whole body trembled slightly. As an 8-year-old girl with a profession level less than grade 2, she couldn't instantly integrate the power of two Sons of Fear. Moreover, judging from the Elven Ranger who just cast fear, he must have a lot of divine power of fear. He must be one of the more powerful Sons of Fear to be able to trigger the test of death effect and scare so many grade 2 and above enemies to death. If he was given a little more time, he could even grow into an existence that could compete for the throne of the Dread Lord in the future. A powerful divine power broke out. Vivian's body actually glowed, and the Elven Ranger's body quickly lost its vitality. It was an indescribable feeling. He had just died, but it seemed that he had been dead for a long time, even if his body hadn't begun to rot. The little girl's expression became more and more painful, and then she suddenly fainted with a scream, and her figure fell directly from the sky. Gloria opened her hands to catch her, but because she was very weak after being injured, she also fell to the ground. The physique of a witch was definitely not as good as that of a melee profession. Just now, even her protective spell had been activated. Perhaps her injury had reached the level of serious injury or even higher. Soren rushed over in an instant, holding his curved sword in front of the two. "Take her away." His expression was a little determined, and his face was unusually gloomy. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Use the teleportation spell. Go now and I'll cover you." The explosion of Shadow Jump couldn't be used casually. If one hadn't entered the legendary realm, using this ability would be like the barbarian's berserk talent. The body would consume a lot of energy when traveling through the shadow plane, and the whole person would also enter a state of fatigue directly after using it. Basically, all supernatural abilities were like this. After berserk, the barbarian would also be very weak. Soren was not a legendary rogue yet. His body still couldn't adapt to the backlash caused by the plane travel. After all, this was a supernatural spell-like ability, not a real teleportation spell of a wizard. In the case of a powerful explosion, he also had to pay a higher price, unless he mastered the legendary skill, Shadow Realm. Gloria's expression was very complicated. She looked at the many enemies in front of her. Although the followers of Mailer had suffered heavy casualties, there were at least a dozen hunters who were close to grade 4. These were all enemies with a profession level of 10 and above, and a few of them seemed to be dangerous characters with a profession level of 15. Soren couldn't be a match for these people at all. Not to mention that he had just used an explosive ability. Even if he was at his peak, it would be impossible for him to deal with so many enemies. "Go!" Soren's expression was ferocious. He roared at her and roared, "Retreat to the back of the valley. You use the teleportation spell to take Vivian away. I have a way to stop them." The light of a spell appeared. The legendary elemental stone was activated by Soren. As the rocks and soil on the ground rolled, the ground in front of him directly connected to the elemental plane, and then he summoned and constructed a grade 4 earth elemental. The summoned earth elemental was not an advanced one. Soren directly controlled it through his will, and at the same time he made it block in front of the three of them. A grade 4 earth elemental. Its HP was close to 300 points. Soren would need to slash at it dozens of times to kill it, but it was enough to hold on for a while. Gloria's expression was complicated. There was a hint of struggle in her eyes, but in the end she gritted her teeth and began to cast spells quickly. Northern witches were not shy girls. Women who could grow up to become high-grade spellcasters were not simple. She naturally knew the price Soren had to pay for staying behind to block them, but if she wasted this precious time, the three of them would all die here. A high-grade wizard would always leave a way out for herself. She had already left a teleportation mark in a safe place before she set off. Soren didn't have time to talk nonsense. He clenched his curved sword and rushed forward, leaving Gloria with only a resolute back view. The earth elemental could stop the ordinary enemies, but it couldn't stop the high-grade professions. He had to fight for 30 seconds. A long-distance teleportation spell needed at least 30 seconds to cast. During this time she couldn't be attacked, or else she might be planning to cast the spell. The enemies in front of him reacted quickly. The first one to rush over was the black gnoll. It roared and its muscles swelled. its veins twisted like earthworms. This was the monster's wild and violent ability. It didn't have any profession requirements. The battle couldn't be fought near Gloria, or else the enemy would directly throw a weapon at her and interrupt her casting. Soren controlled the earth elemental to block in front of him like a wall. He then jumped up and directly faced the gnoll hunter in front of him. Clang. A harsh collision sound was heard. Soren's figure fell back and a trace of blood flowed out of his mouth. 5 seconds had passed. The high-grade hunters sprinted for hundreds of meters and were already in front of them. Clang, clang, clang. Soren's arm was scratched by the sharp claws, and a piece of flesh was torn off. The protective energy of stone skin was still there, but it couldn't stop the enemy's attack. It was a hunter with a profession level of 15 or above. The earth elemental blocked in front of the enemies, waving its thick stone arms to force them away. However, there were still some who went around from the side. These high-grade professions could easily jump on roofs and run on walls. The heavy and slow earth elemental couldn't stop so many people. Swoosh. Soren directly threw his curved sword, and it hit the back of an enemy in an instant. The enemy staggered and fell to the ground. The moment he rolled to avoid the attack, 2 daggers appeared in his hands. Clang, clang, clang. 15 seconds later, a tall and majestic hybrid orc warrior rushed up. It only took one swing of its axe to make a dent in the earth elemental's arm. A 4th-grade creature couldn't win against a 4th-grade profession. The difference in combat skills between the two was too big. Soren opened up the distance between them, and then pointed his finger forward. 2 arcane missiles were shot out. The hybrid orc blocked the attack with its weapon, but it suddenly screamed. An energy beam hit its eye socket. The energy ring. Soren waited until now to use this precious item. 25 seconds had passed. A mixed-blood orc rushed over from the side along the mountain wall and threw his weapon out. There was a muffled sound in the air. Gloria's energy protective force field was still there, but it was already showing signs of breaking. The energy barrier couldn't withstand the attacks of these Tier 3 and above enemies, and they could break it within 3 moves if they tried to close the distance between them. 30 seconds had passed. Gloria completed the teleportation spell. The low-grade anywhere door could only teleport a short distance. If she wanted to leave safely, she had to teleport more than 100 miles away. Otherwise, she would be found by the enemy before she could recover her combat power. The hunter's tracking ability was stronger than the ranger's. She didn't even have time to memorize the spell again. A teleportation door opened. Gloria gritted her teeth and carried Vivian into the teleportation door. The enemies nearby were already 50 meters away. Before entering, she looked back at Soren and saw his back covered in blood. There were 5 claw marks on his back, but he was still standing like a rock. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt very sad. A trace of moisture appeared in the corner of her eyes, and finally, it turned into a drop of something called a tear that she didn't know. As a high and mighty northern witch, this was the first time she had felt such a strong sense of powerlessness. If one was not a legendary being, it would be impossible to fight against so many enemies. Even a wizard couldn't do it. As Gloria stepped into the teleportation door with Vivian in her arms, the surrounding hunters suddenly roared in anger. The gnoll's eyes were bloodshot. They howled and rushed toward them like crazy. Soren's face was a little twisted. Because of fatigue and pain, his injuries were not light. Facing the enemies surrounding him from all directions, he smiled ferociously and murmured as if he was a little crazy, "I've been through so many storms and waves and I've killed 3 times in the abyss. I don't believe I'll die in the hands of these trash who aren't even legendary. Goddess of luck. Take care of me this time. I'll definitely repay you in the future. I'll definitely be on your side in the battle of the Titans." He suddenly took a deep breath. Then he used all his strength to jump out and forcibly broke out of the enemy's encirclement. He ran toward the other side of the cliff that was hundreds of meters high. After using his last burst of strength to open up the distance, he suddenly disappeared from the enemy's sight. Of the 2 shadow dancers, the last one was evade sight. Soren entered stealth. Chapter 119. The piercing cold wind was howling. On a wizard tower erected by the lakeside, a faint light suddenly appeared. The cold wind rolled up the snowflakes, but when they reached the surroundings of the wizard tower, they strangely disappeared. The snowflakes seemed to have hit an invisible barrier and fell lightly on the ground. On the 12th floor of the wizard tower, a portal made of a large number of gems and secret materials appeared with a light, and then Gloria appeared with Vivian in her arms. Wizards would set the location of long-distance teleportation to the safest place, and the most likely place was the wizard tower they controlled. The heavy steel golem stepped in and lowered its head to Gloria in front of it. "Dear Master, I'm sorry to disturb you. Is there anything you need?" Its voice was like the friction of metal. It used soul fragments as imprints, which gave it a certain degree of intelligence. This was a higher-level golem and it could carry out some simple orders. Gloria glanced at it expressionlessly. A wizard who was prepared was unmatched. Even if she faced hundreds of hunters with her real strength, she was not powerless. However, too much of her power was in the wizard tower. In this wizard tower, there were 12 level 15 steel golems, and 36 level 10 clay golems and stone golems. Some of the powerful magic devices could not be shrunk to be carried around. In addition to the usual staff and scrolls, high-grade wizards would at most carry some protective equipment. Without the protection of the golem army, even high-grade adepts would not have the time to cast spells. Energy shields alone would not be enough to stop a large group of enemies. Gloria gently put Vivian on the bed. She raised her hand and stroked the little girl's pale face. She seemed to be a little uneasy. Vivian seemed to be unable to bear such a powerful divine power. The power of the Son of God was awakened step by step. Vivian had just become a wizard, and she had absorbed such a huge amount of divine power. The result was unpredictable. The Elven Ranger's divine power had obviously been transferred to her. The combined power of two children of God was at least at the legendary level. An 8-year-old girl might not be able to fuse them. No matter how powerful the bloodline was, it would still take time to fuse with it. The bloodline of the dragons was considered to be the best in the various planes, but young dragons were considered to be very fragile creatures. Vivian was like a baby dragon. When she was still in her infancy, her body had been injected with the power of an adult dragon or even an ancient dragon. If she couldn't control this power, she would either go mad or die. Gloria's fingertips glowed with a magical aura. After confirming that Vivian was only temporarily unconscious and not in any life-threatening danger, she walked towards the top of the wizard tower. She was going to perform a divination ritual. In the biting cold wind, Gloria walked to the top of the wizard tower, where there was an ancient astrology platform. This tower had been passed down for many years among the northern witches, and she was the new master. The northern witches had the talent for divination spells. Many of them were not wizards who specialized in divination spells, but they had an ancient inheritance in divination. Gloria took off the veil on her face, revealing a face that could topple countries. The wizard robe on her body was fluttering in the cold wind. The northern lands were always cold like knives. She knelt in front of the astrology platform and took out a set of delicate cards from her sleeve. There were mysterious runes on them. There was a price to pay for divination. Witches who often used divination spells or prophecy spells would have a shorter lifespan than other witches. This was because even witches rarely took the initiative to perform divination for others. She knew that the hope was slim. However, Gloria still wanted to know if Soren had survived. She hoped that he could survive. Whether it was divination or prophecy, the accuracy rate was not as high as one would expect. In order to obtain a sufficiently accurate divination, one had to pay a corresponding price. The most common price was one's lifespan. Gloria slowly closed her eyes. Her fingers shuffled the cards at an amazing speed, and the runes emitted a faint light. In the end, when she opened her palm, all the cards were suspended in the air on the astrology platform, emitting a sparkling magical aura. She still did not open her eyes. She just stretched out her hand and pulled out one card, then the second and finally the third. The other cards fell to the ground and she covered 3 cards in the center of the astrology platform. Gloria gently opened her eyes. Her expression seemed to be hesitating, but in the end she slowly opened the cards. She was a little worried that she had foreseen something bad. The first card was opened and it was a ferocious little devil. This was a demon from hell. Gloria's face was slightly pale because this could mean that Soren had died. His soul had been sent to hell and then turned into a demon. Of course, it could also mean something else. Because the northern witch's divination could only know the final answer after looking at all the cards. The second card was opened and it was a big tree that almost covered the sky. This was the legendary tree of life, and it was also the divine tree that the elves believed in and lived in. Gloria's face regained a trace of color, and her expression seemed to be a little surprised. She couldn't wait to flip open the third card, but this card made her silent because it was a big ghost card. This was the card that appeared the least in the northern witch's divination. The small ghost was engraved with the lowest class of demons, while the big ghost was engraved with a handsome face. He had dark skin and hair, and his pupils were flashing with the color of hell. He also had a pair of dark red horns on his head. This devil's clothes were rather extravagant. The colors were mainly red and black, and there were extremely complicated patterns on it. He held a ruby scepter in his hand and stood in front of the throne, looking down at everything with a high and mighty gaze, as if he was looking at the so-called living beings in the plain. This was the big devil. The legendary lord of the 9 hells, Asmodeus. The most powerful ancient demon in history had existed for countless years, and it was possible that he would continue to exist for countless more years. This was a card that represented many meanings, but it was definitely not a simple card when it appeared. Anyone who had a big devil in their divination would definitely not have an ordinary life. The little devil was one of the more common cards, but the big devil had only appeared a few times in the northern witch's divination. The last card was actually the big devil that represented the Lord of Hell. This was even more surprising to her than the big devil in the first card. For a moment, even Gloria couldn't determine whether Soren was alive or dead. For a high-grade northern witch to draw big and small devils at the same time in a divination ceremony, his fate was difficult to be determined by divination spells. This meant that even a legendary divination spell couldn't determine whether Soren was alive or dead. Gloria stood up with a complicated expression. Suddenly she staggered and almost fell on the astrology platform. A deep sense of powerlessness enveloped her body. In a trance, the scene around her completely disappeared. She seemed to see endless illusions and endless blood and fire burning. When she looked up, she saw the shadow of a goat's skull, and its pupils were burning with faint flames. The illusion only lasted for a short time. When she recovered from the backlash of the divination spell, she was already standing at the edge of the wizard tower. If she took one more step, she would fall from the wizard tower that was hundreds of meters high. The biting cold wind was still whistling. Her wizard robe was soaked, and there seemed to be a bone-chilling cold all over her body. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. When she turned to look at the astrology platform, the card that represented the big devil had already burned and turned into ashes in the faint flames. The other 2 cards were still intact, but that one dissipated in the cold wind. The will of hell? Gloria suddenly trembled all over and murmured, "Could it be that the big ghost doesn't mean anything else? Does it really mean the Lord of Hell?" She seemed to have felt something. Gloria suddenly reached out and stroked her long hair. She didn't know when, but there were a few more silver strands in her hair. Hiding in the forest was definitely out of the question. High-tier jackalens were too good at tracking. As long as the smell of blood was still there, it was only a matter of time before it found him. If he wanted to escape, he would have to take some risks. He had made a crazy decision. In fact, when he activated Evade Sight, he had already made a crazy decision. In front of Soren was a cliff that was hundreds of meters high. This was a natural fault near the forest. There were lush trees below, and a small river could be vaguely seen in the distance. If he jumped from such a high place, he would definitely die. Even if he had 25 points of constitution, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. The damage from falling from such a high place was too great, and the probability of a legendary profession surviving was not very high. Of course, Soren wouldn't be so stupid as to jump down and pray that he would be fine. Perhaps even the goddess of luck couldn't do anything about it. He had never been a person who liked to gamble on his luck. Even if he wanted to gamble on his luck, he had to make sure that he had a certain degree of confidence. Soren quickly found his target. His expression was a little ferocious. Perhaps it was because it was too risky, and his calmness couldn't control his gradually accelerating heartbeat. Soren gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. Then he took out a hook from his multi-dimensional bag. It was the tool he used to climb over the wall of Whiterun. He took a deep look at the bottom of the cliff. About 100 meters above the ground, there was a small fault. There were protruding rocks nearby, and there was also a tree that wasn't very thick-rooted nearby. He silently calculated the position and tied the cloak on his back. It looked like the simplest parachute that could be opened after jumping down to reduce the speed of falling. He held the hook in his hand, the hook in his right hand, and the rope in his left hand that was about 20 to 30 meters long. After Soren took a deep breath, he suddenly jumped down from the cliff that was hundreds of meters high. The biting cold wind blew as he fell through the air. The scenery in front of Soren's eyes was falling at a crazy speed. He pushed his extraordinary agility and balance to the limit. The cloak slightly reduced his speed, but he was still falling rapidly. He tried his best to keep his eyes open and locked onto his target. After falling about 300 meters, Soren threw the hook in his hand. Life and death were decided in this instant. The next moment, the hook lock hit the tree trunk and wrapped around it 3 times. The hook was fixed between the branches of the tree trunk. The rope that Soren threw out straightened and tightened rapidly. Under the strong force of the fall, the rope was also pulled out of his palm quickly. His palm had become a bloody mess. The hook that was fixed to the tree was pulled taut. The moment the hook was hit by the force of the fall, Soren's hand that was holding onto the rope loosened a little. If he didn't reduce his strength at all, the rope might break directly. This process only took 2 seconds and lasted for 20 meters. Soren's hand that was holding onto the rope slowly moved down, allowing the rope to break free from his hand. At the same time, he used a perfect amount of force to counteract the force of the fall. The friction caused by the rapid fall made his palm bleed. His skin and flesh were stuck to the rope, and his bones could be vaguely seen. 20 meters was enough to counteract most of the force of the fall. When the rope in his hand was rapidly reduced to less than 2 or 3 meters in length, Soren suddenly wrapped his arm around the rope, and then the remaining strength burst out at this moment. The rope instantly sank and the tree branch above it shook a little. The recoil caused Soren's falling speed to suddenly stop, and he even flew up a little. The tree branch was able to withstand the force of the fall. The rope was also able to reduce the force of the fall due to the friction, and it didn't break immediately. Soren's body rebounded for 3 to 5 meters due to the deformation of the tree branch, and he fell down a little more. However, the force of the fall was already very weak. He successfully counteracted the force of the fall and stabilized himself in midair. He was about 100 meters away from the ground, and if he jumped from this height he would still die. Soren panted a little to recover his strength. He allowed his injured arm to recover from the force of the fall, and drank a healing potion at the same time. Then he began to shake the rope lightly, and the swaying gradually became stronger. Finally he hit a rock on the cliff. Clang! A dagger with a cold gleam pierced into the rock. Soren's swaying body immediately stabilized in front of the cliff. He looked at the steep cliff and stepped on a protruding rock. Then he clenched his teeth and used his other bloody hand to pull out a second dagger, and stabbed it into a spot next to him. Phew! Soren let out a long breath and then slowly took a deep breath. He untied the rope on his body and stepped on a protruding rock that was less than 3 centimeters wide. Then he used the force of the dagger to slowly climb down the cliff. Clang! Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The dagger in Soren's hand was very close to breaking. However, he had already climbed tens of meters, and the protruding rocks were increasing. His speed was also increasing. There were some places where he could directly climb down, but when there was no place to borrow force, he would use the dagger to open a path. He relied on his explosive strength and the support of his 20 points of physique. He used the sword form, heavy hack, to stab the dagger into the cliff to absorb the force of the fall. He was getting closer and closer to the ground. When he was about 30 meters away from the cliff, Soren directly slid down the cliff. The friction from the fall made his injuries worse, but when he was about 10 meters away he directly jumped down from a height of about 3 stories. Bang! Soren knelt down on one knee to reduce the force of the fall. His bones felt like they were about to fall apart, and his injuries were all over his body. He only had a quarter of his HP left. The accumulated bruises were actually close to 30 points. If it wasn't for his physique, he would have already lost all his strength. On the cliff, the figures of the hunters appeared at the edge of the cliff. The moment Soren jumped down the cliff, they had already discovered his tracks, and in the next moment, they would forever remember this crazy enemy. After Soren landed, he raised his head and looked at them. His face was a little ferocious. Suddenly he laughed crazily, and in the end it turned into a crazy laugh. His body was covered with wounds. His palms were already showing some white bones, and his back was a mess of flesh and blood. His injuries made him look like a demon, but he was definitely crazier than them. I knew I wouldn't die here. Soren looked at the cliff that was hundreds of meters high with a murderous gaze, and then ran away without looking back. One day, he would take back what he had lost today. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.